I'm currently in a predicament, and quite frankly, I don't know what to do. I'll start from the beginning. 5 years ago, my next-door neighbor Charlie, or Charles as we call him, informed us of his 14-year-old son's disappearance. He reported it to the police, it was on the news, it was everywhere. Me and my wife felt absolutely awful and always offered to help them out in any way we could. As the years passed with no word of their son, we assumed they eventually came to terms with it and realized the worst had probably happened. Me and my wife never had the nerve to ask if the body ever turned up. Occasionally Charles and his wife would invite me and my wife over for a barbecue during the warmer months. We noticed neither of the two were ever the same since their son had gone missing. Charles' wife Kathy was always quieter and more reserved, and Charles just seemed more awkward and nervous, both understandable to a certain extent. Fast forward a couple of years later to just last week. Charles came over to me when I was taking out the garbage and asked to borrow a shovel. Without hesitation, I ran to get him my best shovel, not asking why he needed it. He thanked me and said he just had to do some work in his backyard and he'd get it back to me by tomorrow. He then disappeared into his backyard. I went inside, and when I was by one of my upstairs windows that has a clear view into Charlie's backyard, I could see he was digging out a really big hole in the ground. He seemed to be struggling a bit. He's 56 after all. I figured I'd go grab my second shovel and help him out. As I entered his backyard and called his name, he looked up from what he was doing, dropped my shovel, and hurried over to me, saying, No, it's okay, Tim, I got it. Please, just leave." I said, "What's wrong with you? It's not a big deal." Mainly because of his bizarre reaction. He told me I will not allow you to use that shovel in my backyard, and then pointed to the gate as if I were a dog. I was so taken aback by how he was acting that I just left without saying another word. I went upstairs to spy on him through the window. He was digging the hole for at least another half hour. When it finally looked like he was done, he started looking around, like up high at neighboring houses as if to check and make sure nobody was watching. And then, before I could think to hide, he spotted me at my window. All I could do at that point was casually walk away. He's up to something, and I wanted to find out what. I continued to look at his backyard every so often, but he wasn't digging anymore. I figured he knew I was watching now and would wait until it was dark out. And I was exactly right. At 1:30 in the morning, I heard the sound of a shovel hitting the dirt outside. It was too dark to see anything from my window now, so I snuck outside quietly and looked over the fence in the backyard. I could see him digging loud and clear now. When he went inside his house, I took that opportunity to sneak into his backyard and take a look at what was in the hole he was digging. The moonlight alone revealed a small piece of a black garbage bag protruding from the dirt at the bottom of the hole. I looked at his back door and back at the hole. I did this 3 more times, deciding whether or not to see what was in the bag. In the end, I decided to run back to my backyard, and it was a good thing I did because he came back outside seconds later. But he wasn't digging. In fact, he disappeared to the other side of his house and didn't come back. I went back into my house and quietly got back into bed, trying not to wake up my wife. The next day, the first thing I did was look out my window to see that the hole in the ground was completely patched up in Charles' backyard. I also noticed that his SUV was parked in the street now instead of his driveway. I don't know what happened throughout the rest of that night, but I'm disturbed to think that what was at the bottom of that hole might have been his son's body. For all I know, he dug up that hole to remove whatever he had previously buried down there and drive it somewhere else to dump it. This is all speculation, call me crazy if you want. I haven't told anyone, not even my wife. And quite frankly, I don't know what to do. Charles never gave me back my shovel. I'm not going to ask him for it. In fact, he's been avoiding me ever since. And something disturbing happened yesterday. I by coincidence happened to look out my window across to Charlie's house, and caught him standing at one of his windows looking into mine. When he saw me, he shut his blinds, and that was in the middle of the day. I have no idea what to do, but I'm honestly terrified. I've lived in 3 houses in my life, 2 with my family and my current house by myself. We lived in the first house for the first 15 years of my life, and the second house the next 7 before I moved out to my current home. This experience happened in my first home when I was 15, within the last few months of my family living in that house. I don't remember my family ever being really friendly with the neighbors. In fact, there were 2 kids living next door with their dad that me and my brother had only talked to maybe once or twice our entire lives. As bizarre as that is, though we did know both of their names, Eric and Todd. One day, me and my brother, who is 5 years younger than me, were outside playing basketball in the driveway. That was when one of the 2 boys next door, Todd, came outside and walked over to us, initiating a conversation. I don't remember what we said to each other quote for quote, but I remember the first thing that he asked us was if it was true that we were moving. As the older brother, I did most, if not all, of the talking. Todd was probably the same age as me. I never actually asked. By the end of the conversation, he invited me to come with he and his brother to shoot BB guns by the river in the woods down the road the next day. I agreed since it was the weekend and I didn't have anything going on anyway. My little brother asked if he could come at the last second, not under the assumption that he was automatically invited as well. Todd said yeah and then walked away. Late the next day, around an hour before dusk, Eric and Todd rang the doorbell. We were quick to answer the door because our parents didn't know that we were going out to shoot BB guns. Walking down the sidewalks with Todd and Eric decked out in camo gear and carrying a duffel bag of BB guns was really strange. The level of seriousness these 2 clearly had in this was really weird to me and my brother, and we kept meeting eyes, holding in our laughter a couple of times because of it. We got to the woods having spoken very few words. I could already tell these 2 were kids of few words. Maybe why we hadn't met them officially until that point. Todd dropped the duffel bag onto the ground and unzipped it, while Eric aggressively snapped a branch off a tree and threw it into the river. Me and my brother looked at each other again, this time not finding it as funny. Todd pulled out a couple of guns and handed them to me and my brother, and that's when Todd dropped the bomb and told us they were real guns. Eric grabbed a loaded gun from the bag and began firing at trees across the river. When I realized he wasn't joking about the guns being real, I was in a mix of anger and confusion. I grabbed the gun from my brother's hands and placed both of them back in the bag. I told them we weren't comfortable with this and had to leave. Eric stopped firing, and they both looked at us with expressions that seemed half angry. One of the 2 boys yelled a curse word at us as we were walking away. I always had a feeling these 2 were bad kids, but this confirmed it. I told my brother not to speak to them anymore for the remainder of our time living there. We told our parents at the dinner table that night that they were really weird kids, but we didn't mention the gun thing. I woke up that night to a breeze of cold air hitting me in the face. My window was open all the way. I felt something hard press up against the back of my head as I was looking out the window, and somebody behind me going, "Shh, shh." Somehow I didn't scream or jump, I just stayed calm. I was able to understand what was going on surprisingly quickly. I heard Todd's voice in a whisper behind my head. He told me if I ever told anybody, especially his dad, about the guns or the visit, he would come back and kill me and my entire family. I replied in a quiet, shaky voice, "Okay." He pushed my head with his gun before leaving through my window. Every night thereafter for months, I would catch either Todd or Eric at a certain window of their house, looking into either my or my brother's room. Their behavior became more and more strange as we got closer to the date of our move. Just a week before we moved, a rock was thrown at my window one night at like 1 a.m. I opened my window and saw Todd aiming a pistol up at the window, and feeling like I was about to die, I dove for the ground, only to hear the 2 boys crack up in laughter. I heard one of them refer to me as a fucking retard. There were 2 other instances that week where the 2 would harass either me or my brother, and ultimately I couldn't think of a more perfect time for us to have moved and gotten out of there. After all these years, neither me nor my brother told anybody about the boys or their threats. All I know is those 2 boys were trouble, and it was a good thing we got out of there when we did. At the time I'm writing this happened 2 weeks ago. I've always hated just about all of my neighbors. I'm fresh out of college and I'm living on my own, but that comes at a price. I'm living in a really shitty area, the only place I can afford a house. So I'm not bound to have the ideal neighbors. The neighbors on one side always have their music blasting, while the neighbors on the other side are the creepiest people I've ever met in my life. It's 2 people living next door. One woman in her 60s who's not friendly at all and honestly doesn't seem all there, and a slightly younger woman who has some kind of severe mental disabilities. I have no idea what the relationship is between the 2. I would commonly be sitting on my front porch when I'd look over next door and see the older woman holding the younger woman back as she'd be having some kind of freakout episode. She'd have her arms crossed and she'd quickly rock back and forth while screaming and making noises. Sometimes she'd even look over and point at me and mumble stuff to the other woman. It's quite disturbing, actually. Sometimes I even go inside when I get too uncomfortable. Anyway, it was a night like any other. I had to go to bed early for work in the morning. However, the next door neighbors were making an unusual amount of noise. I could hear the deranged woman screaming and throwing a fit as the older woman yelled in distress. This went on for about an hour and I couldn't take it anymore. I marched over to the house next door and banged on the door. The older woman answered and greeted me with a "What the hell do you want?" I asked as politely as I could to keep the noise down. In response, she raised her eyebrows and tilted her head down, clearly annoyed by my request. Just then, the younger woman entered the living room, screaming "How dare you!" repeatedly. The older woman held her back from approaching me, and then slammed the door in my face. I had no idea what just happened, but I felt like I didn't accomplish what I came there for. I walked back to my bed in defeat. However, I realized they had finally gone silent next door. I was able to get some sleep at last. Well, I woke up, feeling like the night went way too fast. I looked at my clock and saw that it was only 3 in the morning. My head fell back into the pillow in relief, but pretty soon I thought I could hear something come from downstairs. I got out of my bed and went over to my door just to make sure I wasn't hearing things. When I didn't hear any other sounds, I went back to bed. I woke up once again to a dark room. Only 20 minutes had passed since I'd fallen back asleep. I didn't know what could have woken me up though. And then I heard. I panicked and tried to find my phone on my bedside desk as a source of light, but when I found it, I didn't dare turn the light on. I looked around the dark room in silence, trying to find some kind of dark figure in the room. I looked at every corner of the room, and even though it was so dark, I could tell there wasn't anybody standing there. This time I heard where it was coming from. I turned to the edge of my bed and saw a black shadowy circle-like object right at the edge of the wooden wall of my bed. When the light of my phone revealed that black object to be the face of the deranged woman from next door, she screamed like the lunatic she was. She screamed as if she were a vampire in the light. I screamed as well. I screamed as I clumsily ran for the door and tripped halfway, looking back to see the woman following me. I slammed the bedroom door behind me and ran all the way downstairs, where I locked the door leading to the upstairs. I called the cops as the woman pounded on the door, screaming incomprehensible things. When the cops showed up, I told them the woman lives next door and that she was mentally insane. The older woman from next door came over after hearing all the commotion and spoke with the cops, pleading with them to let her go, but they insisted they had to take her in for at least the night. One of the officers asked me if I wanted to press charges, and as he asked this, the older woman gave me the most evil, hateful stare imaginable. I chose not to press charges, but her stare didn't change. The officers drove the ill woman away, while the older woman continued to stare at me as she walked back to her house. 5 minutes later, I saw her get in her car and drive away. These two still live next to me. I'm seriously considering moving out because the creepy woman next door makes it clear she despises me. And I've concluded that the mentally ill woman is not only terrifying, but dangerous as well. used to be in the Darien School District in Connecticut during my middle and high school days. It was a wealthier district, and a lot of field trips were offered to the students. I was a member of the chorus, and every year we'd take at least 1 or 2 optional field trips as a class. The year in question, in which I was a sophomore, we took a trip to Woodloch Pines Resort in Pennsylvania. The bus ride there took a few hours. I was with my friend Landon. We were going to be sharing a room. From the moment we got there, we figured it was going to be pretty dead. It was November after all, so it was cold up there. We had 3 days planned for the trip, and there were 4 chaperones. They weren't really following us at all times, we just had to tell them what activities we'd be going to do. The first day was fun. Landon and I, along with 2 girls who we were friends with, did some go-karting, rock climbing, went in the pool, and then we went to eat dinner. After dinner, we went back to our room and just hung out for a while. For the record, not all of us students were able to get rooms next to each other. The room was ground level, and there was a clear sliding door that provided a view of the lake down the hill. We went back out for a while, then came back to the room at about 10 o'clock. We left the blinds to the door open because the moon was giving off a cool reflection on the lake down below. Little did we know that would be the start of a nightmare. If I had to guess, I would say it was a whole hour of us just rolling around in both of our beds trying to get comfortable, occasionally talking, before Landon, whose bed was closer to the door, screamed. I had no idea what was going on, why he could have been screaming, or if it was a joke, until I looked at the door. It was a sight from a horror movie. There was a really tall, skinny older woman with long grayish hair standing on the other side of the door, with her hands cupped up against the glass next to her face, as if she were trying to better see into the room. The woman then walked away. Landon looked at me, I guess waiting for me to get up so he would have the confidence to get up as well and run outside after her. When we did, we didn't see her anywhere though. The cement trail that ran past each and every room of the building was void of any people. There was nobody on the surrounding grass, nor anyone walking down the hill. We both saw the woman though, so we knew we weren't seeing things. The next day we didn't tell any of the chaperones, but we told the 2 girls who we were friends with. Night came once again after a long day of many activities. We entered the room through the back door and made sure to shut the blinds this time. Landon fell asleep before me. I fell asleep around half an hour after him. I woke up to silence. I couldn't tell if something had woken me up or not. All I knew is that I didn't feel right. I sat up and whispered Landon's name to see if he was awake. He didn't answer, so I turned to the left out of pure instinct and curiosity to look at him. But I couldn't see him. Something was blocking my view of the other bed. I looked up, and towering over my bed was the tall old woman. She took 2 steps back as she said, "Your back door was unlocked," before turning around and walking outside. I was frozen in that bed, except for my shaking. I woke Landon and told him what happened. We locked the back door, shut the blinds once again, and agreed to stay up the rest of the night. It was already 4 in the morning, so we wouldn't be losing much sleep. By 8 o'clock, we went to the dining hall to eat breakfast. When we got back to our room building ready to tell our chaperones, we could see the old woman through the glass of the neighboring room. She was sitting on the bed, hands folded, sitting up straight, facing the door, facing us. We ran to the front desk in the lobby building to report her to the staff instead of the chaperones. It was weird, none of them really knew what to do in the situation. Eventually, we persuaded them to come to the woman's room with us. There, they found the woman sitting in the same position, along with an older man sitting on the other bed, looking up at them as they entered. Apparently, the woman had some kind of mental disorders, but the man wasn't all there either. There was something very off-putting about him, and they just weren't the kinds of people that you'd expect to see at a family-friendly resort. The staff wouldn't kick the 2 out like we hoped, though, so we told our chaperones. Long story short, after a lot of arguing between chaperones and staff, we had to end the trip early and we all went home. Me and Landon were just happy to get out of there. When I was in the 4th grade, my class took a field trip to a rural zoo-type place about an hour away from our school. I remember vividly it was a cloudy day with the occasional raindrop or two falling. The zoo was kind of small, but it was kid-friendly. It had a decent amount of habitats, mostly smaller animals though, nothing exotic. There was also a big building as part of the zoo where taxidermied animals were put on display, along with other interesting attractions that I don't really remember. Admittedly, I was kind of off in my elementary and middle school years. I would do weird antisocial things and my teachers and my mom would pick up on it. For whatever reason, when we were touring the building as a group, I decided to walk into one of the bathrooms without telling any of the teachers. I did my business, washed my hands, and entered back out into the hallway. Nobody was around. I walked down one of the hallways we hadn't crossed yet. I still vividly remember the dim, moody lighting and the scarlet red carpets of the hallways. My 8-year-old imagination was going wild as I witnessed all the stiff, lifeless animals that were once alive behind the glass boxes. I stopped in my tracks when I saw some man, obviously hiding behind a stack of chairs. I think I laughed, thinking the man was joking around. He came around from the chairs and walked over to me, asking where the group went. I said, "I don't know." He grabbed my hand and told me to follow him. I must have thought he was taking me back to the group. He led me to an exit door which led to the back section of the building by a couple of dumpsters, a few benches, and the woods. When we got outside, his tugging became a lot more aggressive and his grip became tighter around my arm. He was pulling me into the woods. I didn't scream or cry for help, but I remember the feeling I felt in my stomach, like I was so afraid that I could throw up. And then a woman screamed at the top of her lungs. It was one of the teachers on the other side of the fence. The man let go of me and ran into the woods. Moments later, a few of the teachers ran outside the exit door to this side of the fence and pulled me back inside. The teachers all yelled at me, but at the same time comforted and smothered me. They called my parents, and the field trip was officially over. The owners of the attraction called the cops, we all got back on the buses, and we all went home. As my bus was leaving the parking lot, however, my observant 8-year-old self spotted the man crouching down in the woods near the road, hiding behind a branch, watching the buses pass. Once again, for whatever bizarre reason, I kept quiet. I was probably too shy at the time or just too shaken up to say anything. All the other kids looked at me weird the rest of the ride home. I didn't care. But I hope that man never found success in snatching an unsuspecting young child like myself at the time. Back in high school, I took a mysteries and mythology type class, or something like that. I don't remember the name of the class. It basically just had to do with real life mysteries and creepy shit. I was into that kind of stuff. I was taking the class with a good friend, who I'll call Ben for this story. The teacher of the class took us on a field trip to a nearby abandoned village with an unknown past. The village was built in the early 1900s, but seems as though it had been quickly abandoned shortly after it was built. The bus ride there was about 20 minutes. All of us were glued to the bus windows as we pulled up some sketchy-looking, decrepit road cutting through dense forest. The road eventually led to a clearing. We were there. We stepped out onto the road, which had grass growing through the cracks. The grass surrounding was almost knee-high. Then there were the buildings. The tall, archaic brick buildings with the boarded-up windows all gave off such chilling vibes. The teacher lined all 20 of us up, counted heads, and then began leading the way. The point of this little field trip was to use the so-called skills we learned in class to see if we could put anything together about why the village may have been abandoned so long ago. Some of the buildings had holes in the walls to serve as entryways. There were even holes in the ground next to some of the buildings, seemingly dug to get into the basements of some of the buildings, which seemed creepy. There was one building though. It stood taller than any of the others. It just intrigued me the most. While the teacher was leading the group towards the village church, Ben and I decided to sneak off on our own to look for anything interesting. When we walked off in the direction of the tallest building, we saw a hole in the ground. It was dug by the back door of the building, which had been sealed off. In the hole was a ladder which led down to the concrete floor below. We both looked at each other and knew we had to do it. Ben climbed down first, then me. Luckily, this was just around the time Apple started putting flashlights on their phones, so we had a source of light. It was creepy down there. There were a couple of beer bottles, one graffiti tag on the wall, and dusty wooden planks everywhere. There was a wooden stairway which led up to complete darkness, since all windows and doors had been sealed shut from above. We had already gone as far as to enter the building, so we figured we'd go up the stairs too. I went first, and with each step, the creakiness of the 100-year-old wood made me feel as if I was going to fall through each and every step. Ben followed suit. This floor of the building was very tight. It seemed like there were many openings going off into different, smaller rooms. It was so dark in there you would never even guess it was daytime. Ben and I were honestly starting to get creeped out in there and agreed to go back outside. But just then, there was a noise in one of the tiny rooms, like a big rock hitting the concrete floor. A normal instinct would be to run, but Ben and I froze, locked eyes for a moment, then both tiptoed over to the opening of the room. We shined the lights into the room and ran. We ran back down the stairs and then up the rusty ladder back outside. We caught up to the group out of breath. We didn't say anything though to avoid getting in trouble. One of our classmates asked us what was wrong. We told him we snuck into one of the buildings, and in one of the rooms, when we shined the light into it, we saw 3 guys standing maybe 10 feet away from the doorway, facing Ben and I in a weird formation, as if they were waiting for us. As we continued following the group, we paid extra attention to the tall building we entered from the distance, and before leaving, we saw a person's face at one of the higher level windows that had not been boarded up. We never told the teacher in fear of getting in trouble. We didn't know what to think. Were those just homeless people living in there? Were they gang members in hiding? Ben freaks me out with his theory. He says they were ghosts of the people who once lived in the town. Still, the way the 3 guys were just hauntingly standing there so calmly, staring at us the moment we peeked our heads through that doorway, I still can't get that image out of my head. I may go back to that village one day, just to prove Ben's idea wrong. I was 16 in my junior year of high school. I had 9 periods in a school day. 5th period was lunch, and straight from there was my astronomy class. My astronomy class was actually held in one of the 2 basement classrooms of the school. My high school was big, there were 3 floors, and even that wasn't enough to accommodate all the classes offered, so the school built 2 classrooms in the basement. It was honestly kind of creepy down there when nobody else was around. It used to be a janitorial area, however it was remodeled to better resemble a typical hallway. The only thing, there were no intercoms or loudspeakers down in the basement at that time. For that reason, no classes were held down there first period for the morning announcements. Everyone referred to this little section of the basement as the chamber, and everyone always tried to get classes down there just because it was air conditioned and the classes were typically easier. Plus it had its own bathroom down there. We had a quiz in astronomy that day. Usually I was one of the first done just because I found the class easy. After I finished my quiz, I texted my friend who was in the other basement classroom to meet me in the bathroom because I was bored. He told me okay. I walked out of the classroom and down the small hallway to the bathroom. A few seconds later, the door opened and my friend JJ entered the bathroom. We were joking around for a while until JJ checked his phone and said someone texted him saying the school was going on lockdown. We both looked at each other with the same grins. Neither of our teachers saw us leave the classrooms. That meant we had free range of the school while it was on lockdown. We agreed to sneak upstairs and look around the hallways just for the hell of it. The worst that would happen is that we'd explain how we couldn't hear the announcements in the basement classrooms. Upon opening the basement door to the main floor, we were surprised to find all the lights had been turned off, so the hallways were pretty much pitch black aside from the light pouring in from the doors in the lobby. This was legit because usually the lights were left on in the hallways during lockdowns. Something was going down, and we didn't know if we were even comfortable walking around now. JJ stepped out a little further into the hallway, and I followed suit. JJ then looked down the hall and said, "Who's that?" I looked, and emerging from the darkness was a man. At first we couldn't tell if he was a teacher or not, but as he got closer, we realized this guy wasn't dressed at all like any staff member. He was dressed like a bum. "Alright, let's go," I told JJ as we hurried back down to the basement. He surely saw us, whoever he was. We saw both classrooms had their doors shut and lights off, so to avoid making a scene, we decided to hide in the bathroom. I shut the light first thing and then we both went to hide in the corner stall. There was complete silence in the room, no ventilation, no heaters, nothing. Just the sound of me and JJ breathing, and an occasional drip from the sink. The door to the bathroom suddenly opened, and light from the hallway poured into the bathroom for a brief moment. The door shut, and the bathroom was once again pitch black. Me and JJ tried our best to control our breathing. The room was so silent that we could hear somebody walking over to our side of the bathroom. The person stopped and started breathing really heavily, as if they were out of breath. Me and JJ were both scared to death. JJ did something very dumb. He whispered in my ear, "We have to crawl out through the other stalls." The room was so silent, however, that even JJ's whisper could be heard from across the room. The heavy breathing outside the stall stopped, and the person tried pressing the stall door in. That was when I whispered, "Go, go," to JJ. We both crawled under the side wall to the next stall over, and then the next stall, and then finally out to the other side of the bathroom. The person was now full on banging on the stall door. Me and JJ hopped up off the floor, opened the door, and as the light filled the room again, we saw the guy from upstairs in the corner. We pounded on the door to JJ's class. The teacher let us in within seconds. JJ explained everything as the teacher locked the door, mentioning a gun sticking out of the man's pocket. I was shocked to hear this because I didn't see a gun, but I went along with it anyway. Usually a bunch of high school students would be laughing their asses off at two students causing a scene like this, but I noticed all the kids sitting in the corner looked concerned. A sudden bang at the door made everyone jump and a couple of girls squeal out of fear. JJ, the teacher, and I could see the man standing at the door, looking through the window while trying the doorknob. After a few bangs on the door out of what seemed to be anger, he turned and walked down the hallway back to the stairs. We don't know how much longer the lockdown went on for, but for over an hour we sat in silence in the room, other than the teacher occasionally asking me and JJ questions in a very concerned tone, shaking his head after everything we would tell him. Eventually, somebody from upstairs called the teacher and he instructed all of us to single file walk up the stairs and out of the building, where we would be greeted by cops. Me and JJ did the best we could at describing the man to the cops and to the dean. One of the cops patted me on the back, and we were sent off to go home. After this incident, the school installed cameras everywhere and ramped up the security budget. This incident never got media attention, so honestly, we never found out if police caught the guy. I'm convinced that man had no other intentions but to kill us then and there in that bathroom stall. I'm a retired New Jersey police officer. Throughout my 20 years in the force, the most disturbing call I ever received was for a school lockdown happening at a nearby middle school, of which I'll leave out the name for legal reasons. It happened on a stormy, dark day. My car number was called on the radio to respond to a lockdown, where a suspicious-looking man was seen stepping out from a white van parked behind a school and walking into the back door by the boys' locker room. I pulled up to the back parking lot of the school, right next to the white van. Nobody was inside and all the doors and trunk were locked. I opened the red back door that entered into the gym hallway, right by the locker rooms. The main lights had been turned off, so the whole inside of the school was dark. I unholstered the flashlight from my belt and used it to navigate the halls. I made it to the lobby of the school, where a woman emerged from the front office quietly, telling me to check the boys' locker room but to be careful because the person might be armed. I called for backup on my radio and was assured backup was already on the way. I made it back to the hallway I entered from, where I found the boys' locker room right next to the exit. I pushed it open very quietly. There were no windows in the rooms, therefore there was no light whatsoever in that locker room. Only the light provided by the flashlight. There was a white noise in the room, some kind of vent on the ceiling blowing air, but even over that, I was hearing faint scratching type noises, or little dings on the locker doors from the other side. I was supposed to make my presence as a police officer known, but honestly, I was just too scared. The tension in the room was insane. I held my flashlight in one hand and my gun in the other as I snuck to the other side of the locker room. It seemed like wherever I was in the room, the dings and thuds would be coming from the other side. I was standing in the corner of the locker room, right by the door to the bathroom, when the sound of someone slamming a locker door from another room made me jump out of my skin. I went in the direction where I heard the slam, to find out that it was from the boys' football team locker room. There was no door separating the main locker room from the football locker room. The lockers in here were also 3 times the size. I finally had the nerve to make my presence known by shouting police. After shouting, a kid started screaming help from somewhere in the room. It was very muffled though. The kid pounded on a locker door on the other side of the row I was in. When I found out that the boy was trapped inside of a locker, I felt sick in my stomach. I told him I'd be right back, once again calling for backup while running outside to where the white van was. It was gone. My biggest mistake was not getting the plate number first thing. I told dispatch to be on lookout for a suspicious white van. I ran back into the school and instructed the staff in the front office to end the school day and to send somebody with a key to the locker room to get the boy out of the locker. The boy was held by the man with a knife on his back, as I speculate the man was quietly trying to get the 12-year-old boy to his van. The boy was bleeding on his arm from the man cutting him while resisting. The man's van was spotted a week later in a 7-Eleven parking lot, where he was arrested after being properly identified. I was staying in a Hampton Inn in New Jersey when I was visiting Rowan University, a college I potentially wanted to attend. My family couldn't come with me, so I was on my own. After attending campus tours, I went to get a bite to eat at a nearby restaurant, and then went back to the hotel at around 8 p.m., planning on going back to campus again the next day. About an hour after returning to my room, a strange alarm started going off in my room, along with a white light flashing from the corner of the ceiling. A message started looping shortly after as well, saying something along the lines of, "All Hampton Inn guests, please remain in your rooms, this is a lockdown." I'd never heard of a lockdown in a hotel. I never even knew hotels had alarms like this. I found it more interesting and exciting than anything else. Eventually the sound of the alarm stopped, but the light kept flashing, and every 20 seconds or so the message would repeat. It was only like 9:30, so I turned on the TV just as background noise while I started changing clothes and brushing my teeth. I shut the lights when I was done and hopped under the covers. I watched TV for half an hour before shutting it off. The light was still flashing with an obnoxious bright white every few seconds. It was definitely going to hinder my sleep. I was starting to consider calling the front desk to ask what was going on, when the phone rang. It was someone from the front desk. I was expecting them to tell me something about the alarm and when it would shut off, but instead the person on the other end spoke in a very concerned voice. She told me to remain calm and walk out the door. I took that opportunity to ask her what exactly was going on. She went on to tell me that there was somebody in the room with me and to get out immediately. I dropped the phone and instinctively started looking around everywhere. Part of me was curious to see if somebody was in fact in the room. I checked under the bed, looked into the empty bathroom, nobody in either spot. Then I noticed the closet door right next to the bathroom. It was one of those closets with a wooden sliding door. It was open just a tiny crack, and through that tiny crack, I could see a person's face. At first it didn't sink in what I was seeing, but when the door slid shut, that was when I freaked out and ran out the door. The people at the front desk showed me security footage from an hour earlier of some sketchy looking man walking around the hallways, apparently looking for a certain room. When he got to my door, he opened it with the card he somehow acquired, and that was it. I stayed around as the authorities took the person out in chains. It was a man, of course, on the shorter side, easily 40s. He looked at me as he passed, as if he knew who I was immediately. It's scary thinking back that he may have been watching me for more than an hour from that closet. Before getting into today's stories, I want to talk about today's sponsor, Morgan & Morgan. When my dad was a bit younger, he got into a serious car accident that left him with a few injuries. The other driver was at fault completely, and while the other driver's insurance covered the damages, my dad still suffered major pain and suffering. At the time, he never considered hiring a lawyer because the prospect of it was daunting, but little did he know he could have had a lawyer fighting for him without getting off his couch. Morgan & Morgan has modernized the injury law process so you can submit a claim and communicate with your legal team all from the convenience of your phone. Morgan & Morgan is America's largest injury law firm, having over 100 offices nationwide and more than 800 lawyers. With over $15 billion recovered for clients, Morgan & Morgan has a proven track record of fighting to get you full and fair compensation. Submitting an injury claim with them is so easy that it's more like using an app rather than hiring a lawyer. In fact, it could even be compared more to ordering takeout than hiring a lawyer. In just 8 clicks or less, you can submit a claim without ever having to leave your couch. If you're ever injured in an accident, you can check out Morgan & Morgan. For more information, go to forthepeople.com/Mr. Nightmare or dial pound law, which is pound 529 from your cell phone. My friend Kyle has a 27-footer center console boat. In the summer, he's the go-to friend to have for boat days since none of our other friends have a boat. I'm not a boat expert by any means, but my friend has some kind of radar on his boat that warns of any kinds of landmasses, shallow waters, and other boats. So with that, we're able to stay out on the boat past dark sometimes. The boat can fit like 8 people comfortably. This was on a hot summer day, mid-July. Kyle took 5 of us out on the boat just to drink in the bay. Then, hours later, he took us to some waterfront bar restaurant where we docked the boat, ate and drank, and chilled out for another few hours. We had an abundance of spiked seltzers in the cooler still, and it was a Friday night. So after leaving the restaurant, Kyle took us back to the middle of the lagoon where we cruised slowly with music blasting the whole time. Kyle doesn't really drink, so it works out that he's the one with the boat, and he just enjoys boating us around without having to drink. We passed by the lighthouse on the barrier island. We all had this conversation about how there's something so liminal and creepy about lighthouses at night. Kyle cut the engine and we just floated in place for a while with the music still playing. As everyone talked, I was kind of mesmerized by the lighthouse, finding myself looking at it over and over. I think because I was so drawn away from the conversation that was being had, that I was the one to pick up on a screaming voice from the distance. I said, "Yo, cut the music," a bunch of times before whoever was on aux paused it. I said I heard a scream from the distance. We were currently floating next to an island that sat in the middle of the mainland and the barrier island. We sat in silence for a few seconds as we bopped around, and sure enough, I was right. There was a woman's scream for help coming from that island. We all looked at each other, and I could see the horror on my friends' faces. The screams were absolutely coming from the island. We were too far from both the mainland and the barrier island for it to be coming from there. We yelled back as loud as we could, and the woman's voice called back help. We all screamed, "Where are you?" And the woman's voice called back, "I'm being followed." Communicating like this was hard as we could barely hear each other. One more time, we called, "Are you on the island?" And she screamed back, "Yes." Kyle started the engine without hesitation and started bringing us over to the island. He anchored us when we were close enough to the shore of the little island. All 6 of us got off the boat and started looking around and calling for the woman. This matter became a lot more concerning when she said, "I'm being followed." This island wasn't that big, and with 6 of us walking around with flashlights calling for her, surely we would have found her. On the opposite side of the island suddenly, we heard a blood-curdling woman scream, sounding like it was partially muffled. My friends and I all yelled at each other to meet on that side of the island. We all ran as fast as we could. I ran through painful brush barefoot, and by the time I got to the other side of the island, my feet were bleeding. But there was no one here. I met my friend Kyle and Jake, who were already there, and they said they heard the sound of a boat motor driving away. There was also a fresh wake in the water, clearly from a boat that just left, but it was too dark to see anything deeper into the water. I called 911 and reported this so that Bay Patrol could be on the lookout for any mysterious boats with its lights off. A Bay Patrol boat came to Kyle's boat where we anchored, and we all frantically told the 2 officers aboard what just happened. They walkie-talkied to, I'm sure, every other boat on duty, and it became a whole manhunt. I don't think the boat was ever found though, because it didn't end up on the news or anything. All I know is there was no one on that island by the time we searched it. We were all so freaked out about this that Kyle brought the boat back to the marina, and we all just ended up chilling in his backyard, talking about what happened. To this day, we still don't know what that was about. There were no news articles of missing women as far as we knew. Was it some kind of kidnapping, or was it a group of assholes playing some fucked up prank? I don't think we'll ever know. This is a story from my uncle and my dad that they've told countless times at family gatherings, and it still creeps us all out just as much. It was the 80s. My dad and Uncle Jack have always been avid fishermen. They'd go out deep-sea fishing at least a few times a year in my uncle's boat. He had a 70s 2-cabin cruiser. I've seen pictures and the thing was huge. My uncle used to live in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, where he'd dock his boat. My dad would go up there for a weekend once in a while to go out to sea for a night with my uncle. I've never been into fishing. My dad tried to get me into it, but it's not my thing. I'm also not going to pretend to know much about fishing, but I know the fish you catch will be bigger and more abundant the deeper into the ocean you go. I think they'd primarily go for striped bass, tuna, and cod. They'd go about 20 miles out to sea and just catch whatever they could fit on the boat. They used to be so obsessed that my uncle's walls in his house to this day are still covered 90% in pictures of him and my dad holding fish. This one time though, it was a very unexpectedly cloudy night, and it was a new moon. They were currently in the cabin having a beer together playing cards after supper, when something went wrong with the boat and the lights died. My Uncle Jack had to check the circuit panel, but doing so in the dark with nothing but a crappy flashlight was difficult though. Upon checking the circuit panel, my uncle learned that something caused 2 of the fuses to blow, inconveniently eliminating almost all the lights on the boat, including the running lights. They didn't really have much of a choice other than to call it a night early and wait till dawn to head back to the shore. But within an hour was around the time they started to hear a humming type sound coming from around 20 meters in the horizon. They went out onto the deck of the boat, and my dad always says it was nearly impossible to tell if his eyes were open or closed. That's how dark it was outside. There was a strange humming sound coming from behind the boat. Both my dad and uncle stepped to the stern of the boat, and they realized the humming sound didn't sound like any kind of fish. They said it sounded like a person groaning. But even with the flashlight, they couldn't see beyond maybe 5 meters in front of them. It was starting to rain, so the two of them went inside the cabin. It would have been a horrible idea to try to drive the boat in pitch blackness in the rain, so they went to sleep. The next morning, at the crack of dawn, my uncle woke up my dad and told him to come outside to the deck. Through the thick fog, they could see another boat floating in the near distance. My Uncle Jack drove the boat closer to the vessel and then blew the whistle he had on board to try to get anyone's attention who may have been in the cabin. The boat looked like it could have been abandoned though, so attaching a rope from one boat to another, my uncle jumped onto the boat and the cabin door was unlocked. He stepped down into the cabin and smelled the disgusting, sickening smell of death. He saw a man hanging by a rope in the cabin. He ran back out and back onto his boat and tried to throw up into the water. My dad says he didn't even dare go down and see the body after his brother told him what he saw. My dad and Uncle Jack marked their current coordinates and contacted the nearest Coast Guard station through the VHF radio. The Coast Guard was there within an hour, and only then did my dad and uncle head back to the shore. They still don't know what the humming sound they heard was. This story really still haunts my uncle the most because he's the one who actually saw the dead body. They definitely together hold the scariest fisherman story I've ever heard. I live on a private canal in Florida with my family. I'll keep the rest of my location private. Basically, it's a 15-minute ride out of the canal into the ocean. We have a couple jet skis and a boat, a 35-footer 2007 Proline Express. My dad's baby. He's the boat guy. The jet skis are for my sister and I. So there's 4 of us in the house. My mom, dad, sister, and I. I'm 23, she's 26. Nothing I say in the story will be me bragging at all. I'm just stating facts to help put the story into perspective. We have a few houses around the country. One in California, one in New York, and one in Florida. Our main house, I guess you could say, is our Florida house because that's where my sister and I grew up and went to school. It's in a gated community. Our parents are gone a lot of the time out of state, leaving the house to my sister and I and our dog. We have a nice house, and when we're alone, we sometimes have parties and large gatherings in the backyard because our house is the last house on the canal, and next to the house is a little marsh. The canal keeps going a little bit beyond the house, then cuts off in the marsh. So in one direction we have complete privacy from any neighbors. One really hot day, my sister and I took our jet skis out. Like I said, it's a 15-minute ride out of the canal where it opens up into a bay. Then we either ride in the bay or sometimes take it under the bridge and out into the ocean. Sometimes the ocean will be too choppy though, so we usually ride in the bay depending on the tide. There's always a lot of boats hanging out in the bay area. After a while of riding around, we stopped in the middle of the bay to just chill out. Only minutes later, a medium-sized boat came over to us, and an older man driving it started making conversation with us. He had to be in his late 50s or early 60s. He was on the heavier side, he had a bit of a gut, and he had a beer in his hand, as he's driving a boat for the record. He basically opened up with asking about our jet skis and telling us about his jet skis and his huge house on the water. He invited us to come swim in his pool, and when we said no thanks, we have to head back soon, he asked where we're from. Like I said, I'm not bragging, but my sister and I are good looking, so we do get the occasional creepers talking to us. We were vague answering his question and just said from the area. My sister did the honors of turning her jet ski on first, indicating we were leaving. We waved goodbye in as friendly a way as possible and started riding around again. We looked at each other and laughed when we got away from his boat. He was mildly creepy for inviting 2 girls who could be his daughters to swim in his pool, but we've seen worse. Not long after, we decided to call it a day and bring the skis in. We idled through the canal, and we were about 80% of the way there. We came to the part of the canal where it intersects with our canal, kind of like a T intersection, and we were now in our part of the canal when we noticed a boat not far behind us in the intersecting part we just passed. It looked like the boat of the man who stopped us before. He was just very slowly drifting forward, passing our canal. We didn't know if he followed us or if he lived down the intersecting canal, but we continued home and docked our jet skis. What happened next was where things got really weird. We were washing our jet skis, and we noticed the man's boat approaching our house in the canal. He stopped his boat right in front of our dock and started talking to us again with his creepy smile, complimenting our house and backyard. My sister came out and said what was on both of our minds. "Why did you follow us here? That's really creepy." He replied that he lives in the community as well and just wanted to check our canal out. I think he got the hint that we weren't comfortable and didn't want to talk to him. He turned his boat around in the marshy area and waved goodbye to us. Neither of us waved back. There's a certain point where you cut the friendly act when people are so outwardly creepy and weird. That was one of those times. We called our dad and told him about the creep. He wasn't happy with us for not getting the registration on his boat, which neither of us thought to do, sadly. Things didn't end there. It was later that night that our dog started barking downstairs in the middle of the night. Both my sister and I woke up to it. I looked out my bedroom window to the backyard, and I swear to God, I saw a large person running across the yard towards the dock, then jumping into something in the water. I lifted the window and looked out, but I couldn't see anything. My sister and I ran downstairs to look out the back door with the lights on. Whoever it was gone. But we'd be kidding ourselves if we said we didn't know who it was. It had to be that creepy man who followed us home. I think having a big dog in the house was the only reason he didn't break into the house. We asked the neighbors on our canal if any of them had cameras that could see the boat from earlier, or perhaps anyone coming down the canal in the middle of the night. Our luck, no one in this gated community really has cameras. Not in their backyards, at least. Anytime we go out on the boat or jet skis now, I feel like in the back of our heads, we're always looking for that man and his boat now. Halloween used to be one of my favorite holidays. Now I kinda just enjoy it when I have a decent party to go to. In 2018, when I was a senior in college, my friend Tracy's sorority was going to be throwing a big Halloween party at the sorority house. She said I could bring one friend since they didn't want too many outsiders at the party, so I invited my best friend Cody. We're very last minute people when it comes to Halloween costumes. The party was that night and we didn't have anything. Cody was working late, so he'd have to meet me right before the party, so he asked me to get a costume for him and he'd just Venmo me the money. I ran to the nearby Spirit Halloween store that opened up like 5 minutes from my house. I was just shotgunning it. I picked a Where's Waldo costume for myself and a Superman costume for Cody, both two of the cheaper costumes they had. Everything was normal until I got to the cashier. I was on the phone with Cody telling him about the costume I got him and giving him details about the party. I told him which sorority it was, that Tracy got us the invite, gave him the address, and then he convinced me to pick him up instead of us just meeting, stuff like that. All of this was said as the cashier was watching me. He was some guy who was decently older than me, but because of his receding hairline, I couldn't put a gauge on it as to whether he was in his 30s or low 40s. He wore glasses though, and had a skinnyish build and an awkward presence. As he rang up the two costumes, he had a comment something along the lines of, "Sounds like you have a fun party tonight, huh?" I chuckled and said yeah. Then he started asking more details, like if it's open invite, and had a comment about there being lots of girls. I said it's closed invite and that I barely got an invite. He said it's all good. Then he shook my hand and introduced himself as Mike, so I did the same and told him my name was Sean, and then I left. It was weird. Fast forward to later that night. I picked up Cody and we arrived to the party around 10 p.m. It sounded loud inside, and there were multiple groups of people entering the house before us. At the door, a girl asked us who we knew there, and I told her Tracy. She let us in, and we were in this huge living room area. Music blasting, all the lights dimmed low, Halloween decorations everywhere, and to top it off, people with red cups full of booze crowding the place. We saw Tracy and hung around her for a while. We played beer pong and other drinking games. It was a very legit party. But then, at some point, there was a commotion by the front door area. Cody, Tracy, and I and a few others walked over, and the girl at the door started calling out, "Where's Tracy?" She came forward, and the girl asked, "Who is Sean?" I said, "I am." Then she asked me who that creepy guy we invited was. I was confused and said, "Who?" She described some older-looking man in a cowboy costume with a fake mustache. He apparently inappropriately touched one of the girls, trying to get her into a separate room, and she screamed for help. Then he took off with something in his pocket. None of the guys chased after him or anything. Immediately, I thought of the cashier from Spirit Halloween. I told them about it, and everyone got even more creeped out. The party went on, but they were a lot more cautious about who they were letting in, and they even considered calling the cops for a second. That whole thing really killed my vibe, and we didn't stay much longer after that. In total, we were probably at the party for a couple hours at most. We left a little past midnight, I think. I didn't drink much. As I started my car, the car parked like 2 cars behind us also turned on, and as I drove in the direction of Cody's house, the car started to follow. Cody and I were sure it had to be him after it made 4 of the same turns, so I pulled to the side of the road, egging him on to pull over, but the car just stopped for a few seconds, then basically floored it past us. We didn't get a good look at who was inside, but I'm still positive it was him. After dropping off Cody down the block from his house, just being cautious, I was staying very aware of my surroundings, and because of that, I noticed a car in the near distance with its lights off, tailing me. It looked like the same car. I got to a main road, once again pulled over, and waited. The car once again waited, and then a few seconds later turned on its lights and floored it in the far left lane, passing me. I was obviously shook, and drove home as fast as I could while I was sure I wasn't being followed. I called that Spirit Halloween location the next day and reported the cashier. They thanked me for the information, but I never went back there, so I wouldn't know if he was fired or anything. Looking back, I wonder if I could have and should have pressed charges. Regardless, I have no idea what he could have possibly wanted from me, but either way, I'm happy he didn't find out where I live. Halloween of 2019 was the most terrifying night of my life. I live in Australia, and because we don't celebrate Halloween as enthusiastically, we don't get as many trick-or-treaters, around 5 or 6 people at most. I am personally a huge fan of Halloween though, to the dismay of my parents who would prefer not to acknowledge it. Obviously that leaves me in charge of putting up decorations and handing out candy. This particular year, Halloween fell on a school night and a storm began just after 6 o'clock, which unfortunately meant my efforts preparing the decorations had pretty much gone to waste. Ignoring my better judgment, I still waited for trick-or-treaters in the living room and watched The Conjuring to pass the time. Around an hour and a half later, I got a message from my friend M on our group chat, asking if anyone would like to mess around and go trick-or-treating. At first I was confused. We hadn't gone trick-or-treating in over 5 years, but I decided it would make the night more enjoyable as nobody was knocking on the door anyway. My other friends, who I'll call S, C, and H, all agreed and asked M where we should meet up. M quickly replied he couldn't make it, which was strange because he was the one who offered to go trick-or-treating, but he suggested a house which has lots of candy. Me, S, C, and H all arrived at the house within half an hour. A large table with a pumpkin bowl filled with lollipops stood at the front porch, and after checking the windows to make sure we weren't being watched, we emptied the bowl between us, only leaving a few to avoid suspicion. As we turned around to leave, we were greeted by 2 men dressed as clowns approaching us up the driveway. They had huge painted smiles and tilted heads. I could tell we were all creeped out, and one of my friends screamed as they started bolting towards us, one squeaking its rubber nose as they chased. After running for what felt like an eternity, we finally lost them. We decided to go to M's house so we could discuss what just happened in a safe area. However, when M answered the door, he burst into laughter. "What the hell are you guys doing?" he said, confused. "You told us to go trick-or-treating. Can you just let us inside?" S replied. After sitting down on M's couch, we all soon realized M had lost his phone earlier that day, and a stranger had suggested the idea of going to that house, presumably some sort of trap from the clowns. After another half hour, I cautiously made it home by 9:30, finished my movie, and went outside to collect the candy bowl I set up. I was shocked to see the bowl was completely empty, However, my stomach turned when I saw a clown nose was now laying inside of it. I told my parents everything that happened and showed them the clown nose that had been left at our house. They assured me it was just some Halloween prank. I woke up around 1 a.m. to noises coming from my bedroom window, like rocks hitting the glass. Although I was scared half to death, my curiosity got the better of me, and I eventually opened the blinds. My Halloween decorations were destroyed and littered the ground below. I stared motionless in complete shock until a lollipop was thrown at the window, breaking my trance. I looked up and saw them, the two clowns perched upon the neighbor's roof, looking down at me. I screamed and ran away towards my parents' room. I'll skip the details that followed, but the police were called and the clowns were not found. The officers informed us they would check out the house my friends and I trick-or-treated at, and they left in about half an hour. The following morning, we were told the house was abandoned, and M's phone was discovered inside. That day at school, I learned M, S, C, and H all had creepy experiences during the night as well. I'm not sure if the clowns followed us home or they somehow tracked us through M's phone. All I know is that Halloween is only a few weeks away, and I am completely terrified they'll return. It was a stormy Halloween night. I was with my three friends John, Mary, and Keenan. Since we didn't have any real plans and were kind of just hanging around, I decided to grab the Ouija board from my closet. All my friends were down to try it. I wanted to be funny but also set the mood, so I got 3 candles, lit them, and turned off all the lights. The 4 of us sat at the table with our hands on the planchette. We started off by saying, "Is anyone there?" Of course, the planchette started to move, and we all started to laugh. It went from Y to E to S, spelling yes. John and I began asking the really stupid, goofy questions, like, "Will you haunt Mary?" And she kept begging us to stop. But as the planchette moved to once again spell out the word yes, we all erupted into laughter. To be honest, I didn't even contribute to moving the piece around the board. I just assumed John and Keenan were messing around for the most part. Then, without anyone asking a question, the planchette started moving to spell the words, "I'm inside the house." More laughs, until there was a huge, very obvious thump sound from directly upstairs, like right over our heads. It most closely resembled a boot stomping on the floor. All of us jumped. Mary started screaming and freaking out. John, Keenan, and I didn't know whether to laugh or be freaked out. My parents weren't home. No one was except for me. We don't have any pets. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. We looked at each other. Then I went to look through the peephole. I opened the door. It was a dad and his young son trick-or-treating under an umbrella. I opened the door and handed the kid some candies. But once I shut the door, it was back to the current reality of the situation, which was figuring out what the hell that sound was. I convinced all 3 of them to come upstairs with me just to check. We all got to the upstairs hallway. All that was on was a nightlight plugged into the floor outlet. We were halfway through the hallway, approaching my parents' bedroom, which was the room directly above the table we were sitting at, where we heard the noise. That's when we all heard the same thing. It was this voice of a girl. What was said, none of us could hear it, but all 4 of us agreed we heard the voice of a girl in my parents' room, followed by the sound of something being dropped on the floor. Mary and Keenan ran down the stairs, freaked out, but not making a peep. John and I, however, approached the door. I opened it quietly and pushed it open slowly. I looked into the dark room, and I saw something tall standing in the far corner of the room. I slammed the door shut and we ran down the stairs. We stayed in the living room and flicked on the lights, and then noticed one of the candles by the Ouija board was blown out. I called the cops, and a few minutes later, when an officer arrived, I asked him to check my parents' bedroom. I led him up the stairs and pointed at the door. He knocked on it and announced police, then opened the door quickly and flicked on the light. He checked the closet, under the bed, nothing. That's when we followed and entered the room as well, and I can confirm no one was in there. While we were at it, we checked every single bedroom and bathroom up there. There was not a single possible place anybody could be hiding. After the police officer left, we threw the Ouija board in the neighbor's garbage, and we all sat under the awning in my backyard, listening to the storm in silence until my parents returned. After telling the story to my parents together, eventually my friends left. My parents seemed to believe us, but what could they really do? I didn't sleep too well that night, and obviously I have no plans of using a Ouija board ever again.
Attention, lockdown, lockdown, lock the doors, stay away from the windows.
Back in 2016, my school went into a lockdown. I was in my senior year and it was the last week of school, so everything was kind of chill and laid back at that point. My friend, who we all used to call Moose, was cutting class with me to smoke in my car in the senior parking lot. One of our friends, Mario, who was in the lunchroom, texted me to come chill with him, so Moose and I started walking back to the school. As we were about to enter through one of the discreet back doors of the school by the band and chorus rooms, Mario texted me saying the school was going into lockdown, and he was right. As we entered through the still unlocked back door, we noticed the red lockdown lights flashing in the tiny band hallway. We walked through the empty hall. This was the quieter section of the school with less foot traffic since we were far from the regular classrooms. I was texting Mario asking him what was going on and if it was just a drill. Moose and I stood in the hallway waiting for an answer. My friend Mario texted back saying, "Dude, holy shit," and the 3 dots bubble meaning he was typing sat under his text for like 30 seconds. Then it went away. He didn't send a second text. I sent him 3 question marks. Moose and I didn't really know what to do. The main hallway lights were shut off, and all that lit up the halls were the backup lights and the red flashing lockdown lights. There were no teachers anywhere to tell us what to do, so we just chilled in the hallway. We tried opening the doors to the auditorium, but they had already been locked. Moose then tapped my shoulder and pointed down the hallway. All the way down, there was someone dressed in black fast approaching, like speed walking down the hall in our direction. At first it looked like a teacher, but as he got closer, we realized he was wearing some kind of white mask. Moose and I started walking backwards instinctively in response to what we now perceived to be a threat. As he got even closer, we could confirm it was a mask on his face. And it was this horrifying, disgusting mask of some pale, rotting-like face. I'd never seen anything so creepy at any Halloween stores or anything. The man was now too close for comfort, and the way he was approaching us was obviously full of aggression. Moose and I turned and started running back towards the band room. We hoped the band teacher, Miss Bryant, would be in there to let us in. We got to the door, which was locked, and started pounding on it, but we didn't have time to wait. Moose and I split up to hide. I hid in one of the music department closets. I don't know where Moose went. I turned the light in the closet off and hid behind a big container. There was a big glass window in the door to the closet, and I could see into the hall thanks to the little light from the backup lights. I heard footsteps approaching from outside, so I ducked my head completely behind the container. I only looked up and peeked at the window after the footsteps had stopped for a while, and I assumed it was clear. But it was not. The footsteps stopped because the man in the mask was standing at the door, looking in through the glass. I ducked back down, hoping he didn't see me, and then the closet door creaked open. It sounded as though he was trying to fiddle for the light switch, couldn't find it, then gave up. I heard footsteps quickly walk away, matching his speed walking pace from just before. I took out my phone to text Moose to see if he was alright, and I saw I had a long text from Mario. He explained that a student was stabbed in the bathroom by some masked man with a blade. Moose also texted me saying he's alright. He ran back outside to his car. I realized that was a good idea. I made sure the coast was clear and booked it for my car as well. I sat in my car in front of the school and watched as cop cars swarmed the place. At least 10 officers entered the building. Moose came to sit in my car with me, and we watched for over half an hour. The school was let out early, with police escorting the kids out, of course. They never even found the masked man in the school. He likely escaped through one of the back doors. There were helicopters searching all day for the man. I'm pretty sure he was never found. I thank my lucky stars I didn't have a similar fate as that kid in the bathroom. went to a very poor high school in a bad neighborhood. Because of that, we regularly had fire drills and lockdown drills in the case of something happening. During a lockdown, the teacher would turn off the lights and we'd all hide in a corner of the classroom without saying anything. It was a cold day in the third quarter of the school year. The windows were all shut, obviously, but still, my teacher had to stop mid-sentence because we could all hear some kind of shouting outside. Definitely some kind of commotion. My teacher went to the window, looked outside, then opened one of the windows, but the yelling seemed to stop by the time he did. At the same time, the dean started speaking over the loudspeaker and said we were going into a lockdown. My teacher rushed to shut the door and turn off the lights, and we all did our thing, went to the corner of the room. Time seemed to move slow as we were all huddled in that corner. Screams started coming from the hallway. Not the screams of students, but deranged, angry screams from a grown man, familiar to the screaming we briefly heard from outside. Someone dangerous was in the building, clearly. The school I went to didn't have security guards, it was too poor, so literally in a case like this, we'd have to wait for police to arrive. The screams were then accompanied by bangs on a nearby door, another classroom. We could hear the screams of the kids in the room next to us. The banging stopped. The screaming grew closer until it was right outside our door, and then bangs on our classroom door. A couple kids screamed and started to cry. The sick man on the other side of the door banged and banged. He started hitting the glass with his elbow, I think, as he screamed insane things that made no sense to us. Some of it being, "I'm sick of it," and "just stop already." The sickening sound of the small, thin glass window of the door shattering made the reality of the situation sink in even worse. Of course, kids on either side of me were screaming and crying now. Me, I was just sitting there in total shock. The man on the other side of the door stuck his arm into the room through the thin window opening and tried unlocking the door. My teacher took that opportunity to grab a pair of scissors and literally stabbed the man's arm. The man cried out in pain, banged on the door a few more times even harder now, and started running down the halls, still crying in what was probably a mix of pain and anger. The lockdown was ended a few minutes after police arrived. There had to be at least 6 cop cars outside. And yes, the crazy sicko man was arrested and probably brought to a mental hospital. The man apparently wasn't armed, but he clearly came into the school with intentions of hurting people. Kids, mind you. I went to a school in California. We always had a lockdown drill once a month, but only one time ever was it not a drill. I was in the cafeteria during my lunch period when the teacher, who was in charge of watching the lunchroom, announced over the microphone for everyone to be quiet. He announced to us that the school was going into lockdown and ordered us to be quiet. I think he genuinely scared everyone by how serious and nervous he sounded, because everyone in the cafeteria looked genuinely shook and actually shut up. I looked around the disturbingly quiet cafeteria and could see everyone else was doing the same thing, taking nervous, curious glances at their friends and strangers at other tables. Then shit went down. A gunshot echoed from across the school, and that's when panic set in with everyone. Some kids ran for the exit door. The teacher in charge of the cafeteria yelled at everyone to hide under the tables as he locked the cafeteria doors and shut off the lights. I was sitting under the table with my friends, heart racing, feeling sick, knowing my life could be in danger. Every minute felt like an eternity, just waiting for someone on the intercom to say it's all clear. Then, across the cafeteria, there was a sudden outroar of screams from students, mostly girls, and the sound of tables and chairs being moved or falling over. My friends and I looked out from under the table, and we saw a kid with a gun outside the locked door of the cafeteria. Then I remember hearing gunshots. He was shooting at the glass door. The glass didn't shatter right away. I don't even know if it did at all, but the entire lunchroom cleared out through the 2 side exit doors to the outside. Students of all ages either ran to their cars or off the school property and into the neighborhood streets. I ran in the direction of the front of the school, also the direction of my house. I saw police cars already outside. I think they had just arrived at that point.
but I didn't stick around to watch. I got home and told my parents, and my dad turned on the news to see the shooting was already being talked about. Miraculously, only one girl was wounded, and the police somehow apprehended him without killing him. I'm sorry for anyone else who has to go through something like this. Fearing for your life that much is not something anyone should have to go through.
We took a field trip in middle school to a salt marsh in our town. It was for our science class to study marine life or something like that. I don't even remember. All I remember is we were in teams of 2, and our assignment was to take notes of certain things we could see through our binoculars. I was paired with my best friend Jordan. He and I were lagging behind the group because we wanted to sneak off and do our own thing. So when our teacher, Miss Stern, and the 2 other teachers on the trip with us were far enough away, we turned around on the path and went a different way. The whole salt marsh was just a large maze of wooden walkways built over the swampy waters. The trip was so mind-numbingly boring to us at our young age that we couldn't stand the assignment anymore. We went off to explore down the alternate walkway that we weren't supposed to go down. It had a big sign posted up saying something like, "Don't go down this way unless you work for the town." So guess what we did? Of course we went down this way. There was a lot of super tall grass everywhere, so we were well hidden from the teachers or the rest of the students. We walked for a while, till we passed this little shed-sized building that said "Do not enter" on the door. We tried the door handle, but it was locked, so we proceeded onward. The more we walked and the more turns we made, the more we realized this place was absolutely ginormous and a literal maze. There came a time where we agreed it was time to head back to the group, because we weren't having much more fun ourselves than we would be with the group. Plus, it was getting late and we'd been gone for a while, and we didn't want to get caught, so we started going back in what we thought was the right direction. But after apparently wrong turn after wrong turn, we admitted to each other that we were lost. Any sense of direction now was completely gone, and the sun was clearly starting to go down. Panic didn't set in just yet, but we were definitely worried. Time dragged on, and we couldn't find the damn path back to where we came from. We tried finding that little building that we had just passed as a sign that we were going in the right direction, but we couldn't. The tall, swampy marsh grass was taller than us and blocked sight of everything. The sun was now setting, and there was no way our class and teachers were still here. This was before cell phones were a big thing, let alone among middle schoolers. We had no way of calling for help, but we refrained from screaming until the sun was practically all the way down and panic now started to set in. Suddenly it seemed we weren't alone. Jordan and I started to hear the splashing of water nearby, exactly the sound of someone walking through the probably knee-high water. We started to walk faster down the wooden pathway, and when we stopped again to listen, the splashing was still there, getting louder and closer. We didn't have flashlights, only the moon to light the way. We knew we weren't alone. Something or someone was in the tall grass, hiding, somehow watching us. Jordan basically had a fuck it moment and went to the grass where the splashing was coming from, pushed a bunch of the giant pieces to the side, and then screamed like a little girl. I didn't see what he saw, but I didn't need to. I ran right behind him down the pathway until we both had to stop to catch our breaths. He saw a person hiding in the grass, though I already figured that before he even told me. We kept running and then stopping to catch our breaths until the sound of a helicopter overhead came closer. We saw it, flying over with a searchlight on. We started waving our hands in the air, and whether that helped or not, I don't know, but eventually the spotlight landed on us and stayed there. We expected the helicopter to lower and pick us up because we were idiot little kids, so when it just hovered there we were confused. But what they were doing was showing where we were to the police search team that came looking for us, after our parents reported to the school that we never came home. We were eventually found by a bunch of police officers and led back to safety. We told them there was someone hiding in the marsh, stalking us of course. Apparently Miss Stern either miscounted on the bus back to school, or she simply didn't do a head count at all, and the buses left without us. Either way, she messed up big time, and I'm surprised she wasn't fired. This was easily hands down the scariest night of my life, and it happened when I was so young too. In senior year of high school, we took an end-of-year field trip to Boston for our U.S. history class. Part of our assignment was following the Freedom Trail and viewing historical sites like the Bunker Hill Monument. There were of course some teachers and volunteer chaperones on the trip, but between me and my two friends Sean and Matt, we were all 18, so we easily convinced one of the more chill teachers to just let us go off and do our own thing. So we strayed off into the city and just messed around having fun checking out the place. We checked out Boston Harbor, where we got food at some waterfront restaurant. Then we checked out the Quincy Market and some other historical landmarks. And then finally we ended up at this little cemetery called the Granary Burying Ground. This is where the horror to this story began. There were of course a few other people in this little cemetery besides the three of us. We weren't exactly that interested in it. We were just walking through it because it was basically one of the major things on the checklist of places that we were supposed to see. Anyway, there was this one guy who caught my attention. He was wearing this old-looking trench coat and a small top hat. It was definitely too warm out to be wearing a trench coat, I know that. He had a gray mustache too, but that's about all I really remember of his appearance. The reason I picked up on him was because he was looking right at me, just standing still. He wasn't walking along looking at the gravestones like everyone else. I said to my friends in a slight murmur, "Why is this guy looking at me?" as I walked past them, making sure they followed me out of there. As we got back to the street, I told them more loudly that I was being eyed down by some weird-looking old dude. Neither of them took notice, but I didn't want to go back to point the guy out, so we kept walking. We were supposed to meet everyone on the trip at the Quincy Market at 5, so we started making our way back there. A few minutes into our walk, I turned around for whatever reason to look behind me, and there he was again. That old man in the top hat not too far behind me. I noticed him through the crowd. He had on his same neutral, almost unhappy-looking face, his gray mustache covering most of his lips. And yes, it seemed like he was looking at me again. He wasn't even moving. I turned back to face forward and didn't see anything. If it happened again, I'd know something was up. And it did. At the Quincy Market, when we were about to meet with the rest of the group, I saw that man again, far away by a street corner facing me. He almost blended in with the crowd if it weren't for his top hat. I ran up to Sean and Matt and pressed their shoulders to get them to turn around and look. I pointed at the corner that the man was at not even 10 seconds earlier, and he was gone. I told them that creepy old dude that I mentioned from the burial ground seemed to be following us and kept looking at us, or at me specifically. I have zero clue where he could have went that quickly though. It didn't make sense. That night at the hotel, I was having a nightmare in which I was in my bedroom back at home, and I was hiding under my bed, and I could see feet coming closer to the bed until they stopped at the foot of the bed. And then the man in the top hat looked under the bed at me with his neutral blank expression on his face. I woke up only moments later to a loud thump in the hotel room. I had no idea what it was. I woke up Matt and Sean and the third guy who was in our hotel room, asking if any of them heard that. No one did but me. I still have no clue what that sound was. Years later, I was going through old photo albums with my grandparents around Christmas time, and I stopped on one page where there was a very familiar looking man in one of them. He was wearing a very similar, if not the exact same type of top hat as the man in Boston all those years ago. He also had the same gray mustache and neutral expression on his face. I asked my grandparents who it was, and they told me it was my grandma's father. Now, I'm not saying I saw my grandma's dead dad that day in Boston, but the resemblance was so uncanny that I'm almost positive my mind was playing tricks on me. That whole series of events still freaks me out to this day. This takes place back in November of 2013. I was in the 9th grade, and I went on a field trip with my Boy Scout troop to Alcatraz Island. For those of you who don't know, Alcatraz Island is a famous prison in the middle of the San Francisco Bay. We had the opportunity to sleep on the island in the prison cells. A few of my friends from the troop and I had elected to go, seeing as this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We arrived on a ferry around 2 p.m. or so. Our tour guide was telling us about the history of the island and how there were a couple of men who once managed to escape and tried to swim away, but they were never found. The common belief is that they drowned, which is very likely because not only is it a far swim, but San Francisco is very windy and the water from the bay is super cold, so hypothermia is also a likely cause of death. As the tour went along, my friends and I were joking around about how this place was haunted. To make things even more thrilling, our tour guide decided to wait until midnight to take us to the execution area in the hospital. My friends Ash, Steve, and I kept trying to scare each other every opportunity we got, like I hid behind one of the dark corners and popped out when Steve was approaching. Eventually, we made our way to the execution room. Ash and I immediately picked up on how bad it smelled, but nobody else could smell anything, and the guide had said that the execution room hadn't been used in at least 100 years. Keep in mind that Alcatraz has been decommissioned since the 1960s, plus the bodies are taken away after execution, so the smell would only make sense if there were rotting corpses. Sure, there were some bloodstains, but they were like 100+ years old. Ash noted that it was weird that no one else could smell what we had smelt, and I joked around saying maybe some spirit is trying to freak us out or something. We went to the hospital next, and I could have sworn I heard some sort of whispering. Ash and I immediately looked at each other as we heard the sounds, and the lights started to flicker at the same time. The guy told us that the lights always flickered, and then he started to explain how the mentally insane would usually come to the hospital and how there was once this crazy inmate who always would whisper when he spoke. It kind of paralleled us hearing those weird whispering sounds. Later on, a bunch of us played cards in the scout named Kevin's cell. It was definitely quite the experience to play cards in a prison cell, I must say. It was around 3 a.m. when Ash asked me to go with him to the bathroom. I agreed, so we made our way over there. I had finished before him, so I waited outside while Ash was finishing up. I had been waiting for him for a while, pacing back and forth, so I decided to go back into the bathroom and check on him. I could hear the sink running, accompanied by the paper towel dispenser. "Ash, are you almost done?" I asked. The moment I said that, the sink shut off, and I heard a slam from one of the stall doors closing. "Ash?" I called out. No response. My heart froze when the most disturbing sounding cackle I had ever heard in my life came from the stall that had just previously shut. I turned around to make a run for the outside of the bathroom. I screamed for Ash, yelling this isn't funny, and he replied from the other side of the door, "What are you talking about, dude?" He opened the door, but I didn't stay inside of there. I went back outside and told him what just happened. His jaw dropped, and he had the most worried look in his eyes. Then he asked me, "If you were in here this whole time, then what was that breathing I heard outside?" We both realized that something was seriously off. We sprinted out of the bathroom as fast as we could and made it back to the cells where everyone was asleep. We decided not to wake everyone and to just get some sleep. About an hour after falling asleep, I was awoken to the sensation of someone tapping my back. I scanned the room and saw nothing, but I knew I was not alone. With the slightest bit of vision in the dark, I saw something black in the corner of the cell. I let out a blood-curdling scream. My scoutmaster came over and asked me what the problem was. I didn't even know what to say. Needless to say, Alcatraz has a long history, and what my friend and I had experienced was nothing short of paranormal. I was home alone one night during winter break. I was watching TV in our sunroom, which is like a smaller living room type space which we use as a TV and movie room. There was also a door to the side driveway in this room. I had all the blinds shut and was under a blanket watching some random movie I don't even remember when out of nowhere the lights turned on outside. We have a motion sensing light out there, so the fact that it turned on was concerning. I had to lower the volume on the TV to listen up for any possible sounds. It was unlikely I'd hear anything from outside though, so I lifted the blinds briefly just to do a quick check. It was clear. There was no way that I know of to shut off that light, so as annoying as it was, I just had to wait. I figured it was a raccoon or a possum or something that might have triggered the light. Though the more I thought about it, the less that made sense. So I put on my shoes and just walked around the driveway to ease my mind. No one was there, so I could go back to watching TV with a clear head. Some time passed, and I suddenly heard a bucket full of something fall over outside, and then the motion sensing light turned back on. The first time it happened, I was concerned, but now I was straight up scared. Someone or something was out there. I was hoping it was an animal, but I really started to doubt it. I didn't want to get up because the couch was actually the only blind spot from the door to the side, and I had a fear of getting up and seeing somebody standing at that door. I wanted to shut the TV now, but the remote was in the middle of the coffee table, and I was afraid to even move that much. I looked to the blinds, which were fully pulled shut. However, I wasn't looking at the blinds. I was looking at what I saw through the blinds. There was a perfect outline of a person standing on the other side, with their arms stretched out a bit from their body. I don't know how to describe in writing how I felt in that moment, but
There was an intense feeling in my heart and stomach area, and I felt like it was harder to breathe. That's how scared I was. I got up from the couch as quietly as I could, but before I could even get to the door that separates the sunroom and the dining room, the person on the other end started knocking aggressively on the window. I wanted to scare them away somehow, but I was too scared to go out there, so I screamed in a shaky voice, "I'm calling the cops." I stood by the doorway for a second to see if they stopped, and they did. But I saw the shadow beyond the blinds move towards the door, and I saw some old, crazy-looking woman with wiry hair on the other side of the door. For a moment I felt less intimidated, until she started banging on the glass of my door with both hands, screaming as if she were mental. I slammed the door to the sunroom and called 911. I reported some crazy, mental old woman attempting to break into my house. I was told to wait in a safe, locked room with a weapon to defend myself until the police arrived. Any nightmare I ever had about a break-in came true when I heard glass shattering outside of the bathroom. I waited a minute after not hearing anything to slowly and quietly unlock and open the bathroom door. I peered into my living room, and there she was, the old woman with the wiry hair, standing in the middle of my living room in front of a broken window. She spotted me when I had the door open and came rushing over to the door. I screamed like the scared 17-year-old I was and slammed the door shut again. The old woman started knocking on the door and wouldn't stop. She was saying things under her breath on the other side, and I couldn't make out any of it. I was too busy crying and begging her to go away. I finally heard a bang at the front door, so I opened the bathroom window and screamed help. 2 cops came up to the window I was screaming through, and I begged them to crawl through the broken window out back. They assured me they'd be okay and they'll be right here. The knocking at the door stopped, and a sudden commotion was taking place outside. I heard the 2 cops scream at the woman to step away from the door. When I stepped out from the bathroom, the 2 cops had the insane woman detained. I'd imagine they did it pretty easily. The woman looked at me with a look of crazy in her eyes, and I looked away. It turned out the old woman lived in a nearby house with some woman who never leaves the house. None of the neighbors ever really see her. The old woman was messed up in multiple ways and belonged in some kind of special care place. My parents pressed charges on the younger woman because they felt as her supposed caretaker, she should have been held liable for allowing a mentally disabled person to break into someone else's house. Sadly, my parents lost the lawsuit, but the old, crazy woman was out of our neighborhood at the very least, and was put in some kind of treatment center. I own a small house on a big property in the rural part of New York, and I go up there a bunch of times a year in the winter months to go skiing. There's a neighbor up there that I'd never spoken to once. There's a fence that separates our 2 yards. Then on the other sides of my house is woods for miles. There's another neighbor further down the road across the street, and I'd met him a number of times because he happens to go skiing too, so we got to know each other based off that. I went up this past January for the first time in the season. As I walked up to the front door, I heard a kid laughing nearby in the neighbor's house's direction. I figured they had kids, which was news to me. Stepping into the house for the first time each season was always weird. A house that would be empty for a majority of the year, so I'd have to turn on the water and heat and everything, of course. The first night, I slept like a baby after the 4-hour drive from Connecticut. The next morning, after eating breakfast and changing into my ski gear, I went outside and found a big red ball sitting in the snow on my front lawn. It wasn't there the day before, so I assumed it belonged to the neighbors. I took the ball and threw it over the fence separating our properties. Then I went off to the ski lodge to meet my friend, and we spent the day skiing. When I got back, it was dark out. I'd eaten dinner with my friend, so I was ready to go to bed. Walking to the front door, I noticed that once again, that big red ball was sitting on my front lawn. Now it was getting a bit odd, but once again, I threw that red ball over the fence. I woke up in the middle of that night to laughing outside. A kid's laughter. It was like 2 or 3 a.m. A kid playing outside made no sense. I went to look out my window. I couldn't see any kids though, and now the laughter had stopped. However, I did see something sitting on my front lawn. I couldn't tell from the window, so I went outside into the snow in my slippers and robe,
and saw that red ball once again sitting in the snow. I got chills as I saw it in the same spot once again. I took the ball, and this time instead of throwing it over the fence, I brought it inside my house. I went back to sleep, not hearing any laughter outside again that night. The next morning, before going skiing again, I walked over to the neighbor's house, knocked on the door, and finally introduced myself. Surprisingly, he was an elderly man who seemed completely innocent. I questioned the child's laughter I kept hearing, and the ball that kept ending up on my lawn. He told me there were no kids around there. I got chills again. I thanked him, shook his hand, and went back to my house. I left the red ball in my living room, then drove back up the mountain and had another day of skiing with my friend. When I got back to the house that night, I was completely exhausted and ready to go home the next day. I threw all my stuff on the couch and figured I'd pack it all up tomorrow. I literally crashed into the bed as my whole body was sore, and I fell asleep like a baby. Except I woke up to a kid's laughter outside again. I jumped out of bed and ran to the window to look outside. There was the red ball, sitting in the snow again. I ran to the living room and tore the room upside down looking for the ball. I still know to this day I'd left it in there when I left, but it wasn't there now. I suddenly didn't feel alone in the house. I turned on every light as I packed up all my wet gear into my bag. I threw everything in the bag so I'd be ready to go if shit hit the fan. I made sure all the doors and windows were locked, and they were, so it made no sense. I left the lights on and went back to my room, shutting off only those lights. I looked out the window, and far behind the red ball out in the snow was what looked like a kid. A kid just standing stiff, looking towards my window. I ducked down and closed the blinds. I closed the blinds to every window in my house. I tried my best to just go to sleep and ignore it. It was a long hour before my exhaustion overcame my fear and I fell asleep. I woke up the next morning, skipped breakfast, packed up the car, and sped the hell away from there, not looking back to the red ball that was still on my front lawn. I've never had anything to be stolen in that house, so I was okay with leaving it in this situation. Either way, I can't figure out how whoever was out there got into my house to take the ball out in the first place, and that child's laughter still haunts me. But the scariest part of the whole experience was seeing that child standing outside in the cold snow in the middle of the night. Had that ball not been taken out of my living room somehow, this whole thing would be different. But because of that, I don't know what to think. My roommate George and I met through work. We live 15 minutes from the office and carpool together every day. To get right into it, recently we got a new neighbor. As recent as 2 weeks ago, actually. We didn't see him unpacking or anything. We never even saw what he looked like. We didn't even know if he was a man or a woman, or how many people moved in. But I say he because obviously we found out eventually. So on the third day, George and I actually went next door to introduce ourselves, but he didn't answer the door. He was home, his car was in the driveway. We figured maybe he just couldn't answer it for whatever reason. As we were walking back down the driveway, George stopped me and told me under his breath to look at the window next to the front door. I looked and saw a kink in the blinds. A man was holding it up and staring through it like a creep. George and I looked at each other and kept walking, agreeing that was both insanely awkward and creepy. Now we knew already he was not going to be the best of neighbors. That night at around 1 in the morning, I just started hearing noises coming from outside. It's warm where we live year-round, so the windows are always open. I went to go look outside, and my room is upstairs, so it kind of overlooks the neighbor's backyard, which was where the sound was coming from. I saw the neighbor. He was some big-looking guy wearing a hoodie with the hood up, which was weird given that it was like 72 degrees out, and he was sawing a big piece of wood. It was a ridiculous scene. I went to go knock on George's door. Apparently he was already awake from the noise too. We had work early the next morning, and what this guy was doing at this hour was nuts, and it went on for some time. We agreed to go over and ask him politely to stop. Since he was outside, we knocked on the gate instead of the door. Just as we did, the sawing stopped. We expected the gate to open any second, but it never did. At least the sawing stopped though, so we went back to sleep. It wasn't until a few nights later that we heard noises in the middle of the night again. I woke up, but couldn't figure out what the sounds were right away. Not until I got to the window and realized the sounds were screams. The screaming seemed to be coming from inside the house next door, and I saw the neighbor outside in his backyard again. He was hurrying into his house, but he was dragging something. I couldn't tell what. Then he stopped and looked up at my window. I moved away from the window as soon as I realized. I ran to George's door. He was already awake from the noises too. He got on the phone with the police right away to report this. I stood right by his doorway the whole time listening. Then there was a slam from downstairs. It was our back door. We looked at each other with horrified looks on our faces. George yelled into the phone to send help because the man just entered our house. While he stayed on the phone with the cops, I went to the hallway and then to the stairway. I looked down the stairs and listened. There was creaking in the floorboards down there. I tiptoed back to George's room and shut the door. He told the woman on the line to have the police come in through the back door immediately and then hung up. There's no lock on his door, so we pushed up against the door in case, God forbid, the man tried to open it. I heard footsteps coming up the stairs fast. Then the bathroom door opened. Footsteps then moved quickly to George's door, and we began to push as hard as we could. The man tried pushing the door open, ramming it, and then hitting it with some kind of blunt object. And that was the exact reason we didn't try to overpower him. We didn't know what kind of weapons he could have. No matter what he did though, he couldn't push through the door. We heard him go downstairs and all was quiet. A few minutes passed and we finally decided to open the door and peek outside. It wasn't in the hallway. Suddenly we heard a man shout police in a deep, commanding voice. George and I ran downstairs in relief, but when we got there, we didn't see any police. I noticed right away, however, that someone was hiding behind our dining room table. I told George to run back upstairs with me, and then the man hiding behind the table got up and chased us up the stairs. This time we went to the bathroom where we could at least lock the door, but we weren't in there for long because once again we heard someone shout police downstairs, this time for real. The man banging on the door stopped, and there was silence upstairs. George and I screamed, up here, and the two police officers came up the stairs yelling at the man to drop his weapon. We heard the sound of a knife being dropped to the floor, and when the police told us to come out, we did. They brought him out to the police car in cuffs and put him in the back seat. We told the officers to check his house because we heard screams. They went in with guns drawn as another cop car pulled up in front of our house, and then two more cop cars pulled up 2 minutes later. We were shocked to see the cops come out of the house with a woman crying hysterically. She had been locked in his basement and she was pressed up against the door, screaming as loud as she could. There was also a dead body in the bag the man had been dragging in the backyard. We didn't find out the whole story behind who this woman was, or who the dead body was, but we're pretty sure the man was going to jail for life. The house is now back up for rent, and we're just hoping somebody normal moves in. I've been hiking solo for about 6 years now. I'm comfortable enough in the wilderness that I don't need to stick to main trails anymore, which is probably what got me into this situation in the first place. This happened last October in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia. I'd driven up from Virginia for a long weekend, planning to hit some of the more remote sections that didn't see much traffic. The weather was perfect, mid-50s if I had to guess. Overcast but not rainy. I was looking forward to some real solitude. I was maybe 4 hours into the hike when I reached what I can only describe as a gorge. It wasn't some massive canyon or anything, but it was deep enough, probably 30 or 40 feet down to a rocky bottom with a small creek running through it. Not a guaranteed death if you fell, but you'd definitely break something, and the walls looked impossible to climb with all that loose shale and overhang. there was this massive fallen oak wedged between both sides at a slight angle. It was pretty thick. The bark was worn smooth from weather and probably other hikers using it as a bridge. I inspected it for a few minutes to make sure it was sturdy, then decided it looked solid enough for me. I took my time getting across, trying to maintain focus. I safely reached the other side, and by the time I was back on solid ground, I realized I'd gotten a really nice adrenaline rush from the balancing act. But then I heard this rhythmic thunking sound behind me. I turned around, and there was a guy on the other side of the gorge, maybe 10 feet from where the tree met the bank. He was older, definitely in his 50s, wearing this ratty camo jacket and old-looking jeans. He also had a scraggly beard that made him kind of look like your stereotypical lumberjack. It took me a second to realize what he was holding. It was an axe, a full-size axe. Maybe he really was a lumberjack, but I couldn't think. I was still in shock at the sight of it. He walked right over to the base of the tree and started swinging his axe at it. I shouted across at him, asking what the hell he was doing. He didn't even look up, he just kept swinging. To my horror, I watched as one of his swings landed a little deeper than the others. The tree shifted slightly. I yelled louder, telling him to stop, and that I'd just crossed the gorge on that thing. It dawned on me that this guy probably already knew that, and he was trying to strand me on the other side. He didn't show any signs of stopping, so I yelled increasingly insulting things at him, stuff that didn't even make sense. I finally yelled that I'd need to cross back to the other side, and that's when he finally looked up at me and said, "That's not my problem." He said it so casually, like I'd asked him about the weather. I don't know why, but his casual tone infuriated me, and I admit I kind of lost it a little. I started full-on screaming at him. I said some nasty things, and in hindsight, that probably wasn't the brightest decision. I can't remember exactly what, but something I must have said hit a nerve because he stopped swinging the axe abruptly. He actually set it down on the ground before taking a few steps closer to the edge. I could see his face more clearly after that, and it was not a pleasant sight. His eyes were sunken and dark almost, like the skin around them was dark too, if that makes any sense. He leaned over the edge and told me something that I'll never forget. "I know these woods a lot better than you do." Something about the way he said it scared me. Not threatening exactly, but certain, like he was stating a fact I'd be stupid to argue with. We stared at each other for what felt like forever. Then he picked up the axe, turned around, and walked back into the trees. I didn't say anything after him. What was there to say? I stood there trying to process what had happened. The tree was still wedged in place, but I could tell it wasn't stable anymore. The edge on his side was splintered and cracked. I wanted to cross back to the other side right then and there, but there was no way I was entrusting my weight to that tree now. I pulled out my phone, but it had zero service. I decided to cut the hike short. I was mad for sure, but I was also genuinely spooked. I think anyone else in my position would have been too. Something about that encounter felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. I started walking downstream, figuring I'd find another crossing and it would take me back in the direction I'd come from anyway. But I was dead wrong. I walked for what must have been an hour, and the gorge only got deeper. I was pretty sure the gap was widening too. I kept thinking I'd find a spot where I could cross, but every turn just revealed more impossible terrain. To make matters worse, the sun was starting to drop. I was beginning to panic. It was getting dark, and I was miles from my car in the opposite direction I needed to go. I started seriously considering whether I'd have to climb down into the gorge and back out, as insane as that seemed. Just then, I stumbled on what looked like a campsite. It was sitting in this little clearing with a fire pit that looked recently used. At first, I was relieved that maybe there was a fellow camper or hiker that could help me, but the more I looked around, the more wrong it felt. I realized that there were these carvings on the surrounding trees, not like initials or anything recognizable, just these deep gouges and symbols. There were also a bunch of weird objects scattered around, like rusted tools and pieces of cloth tied to branches, what looked like animal bones arranged in patterns. It was freaky. As soon as I saw that stuff, I basically hightailed it out of there. I was about twice as scared as I had been 2 minutes ago, which was saying something. And then, As if it couldn't get any worse, I started hearing sounds behind me, stalking me. Footsteps, or something like footsteps. Every time I spun around, though, everything went silent. I started thinking some kind of predator was trailing me. I picked up my pace, hoping whatever was behind me would lose interest. But no. If anything, the sounds only got louder and honestly a little closer. What happened next is still the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. As soon as I heard the next sound, I looked over my shoulder for like the 20th time and caught a glimpse of someone ducking behind a tree. A person. I froze and scanned the trees, and I realized there wasn't just one. There was another figure further to the left. They'd fanned out. I was being herded. I don't know what made me realize they'd given up on hiding, but suddenly I could hear them moving more openly. I saw what looked like a pipe or a club in one of their hands, and that was it. I just started running, knowing I couldn't play dumb for much longer. And the exact thing I was dreading happened. They started chasing after me, clearly not concerned with being stealthy anymore. I can't explain how scary it was. I didn't even know what they wanted. I was in the middle of the woods, lost, and the sun had almost set. I felt like I was in a life or death situation, which is probably how I was able to run so fast for so long. I ran faster than I knew I could, and definitely faster than I'd ever run before. One of the people behind me started screaming. Not words, just screams, like war cry type screams. The stuff of nightmares, and I mean that. I kept running. The gorge was still on my left, and just when I felt myself slowing down out of exhaustion, I saw another fallen tree. It was much smaller than the first one had been, but I didn't have a choice. Without thinking, I mounted it and started making my way across. I didn't even have time to see if it was sturdy. Thinking about it now, I was betting my entire life on a tree. It was so tense and I was so tired that I honestly thought I was going to slip and fall. It held up and I made it across. As soon as I made it, I turned around. There were actually 3 figures following me, and they all looked like carbon copies of that first guy who had stranded me. They were filthy, and one of them was in fact holding a pipe. I watched as the first one put his hand on the tree like he was going to cross, then he stepped back down. The 3 of them looked at me menacingly, and for some reason, I found myself unable to move again. Then one of them told me to get the f*** out of there, and that I had gotten lucky, and that was all I needed to hear. I turned and did exactly what they told me to. I kept expecting to hear them behind me, but the forest had gone eerily quiet. The darkness didn't help either, and there were a couple times when I had to fight a full-on breakdown. I must have run at an angle that eventually brought me back toward the trailhead, or maybe I just got impossibly lucky, but I did eventually find it. I reported what I could after driving back home, but I knew there was nothing anyone could or would do. It's been months now. I still hike, but it's honestly not as enjoyable anymore. I really hope I start enjoying it again, because hiking used to be my absolute favorite thing to do, and now I can't even enjoy it without thinking about that experience. It was just so freaky. That first guy with the axe especially. The way he looked at me when he said those things, as if he knew exactly what was going to happen to me. He probably did. Hell, he had probably orchestrated it all. It terrifies me to think that I might have lost my life that day in the woods. This happened 3 years ago. I know a lot of people drag things out, but I don't see the need to do that, so I'm just going to say exactly what happened as it happened. I was hiking through a remote section of forest in northern Minnesota, way off any marked trails. I've always preferred it that way. The actual wilderness, not the sanitized version you get on popular trails with their wooden markers and worn paths. Just me and the woods, the way they're supposed to be. I'd been out there for maybe 4 hours when I noticed I'd lost my bearings. It happens sometimes when you're not following a trail, but usually I can orient myself pretty quickly. This time was different. Nothing looked familiar. The sun was still high enough that I wasn't in immediate danger, but that sick feeling of being lost was already settling into my stomach. I tried to stay calm and kept walking, telling myself I'd spot something recognizable soon. But instead,
I started picking up on this rustling sound behind me, the last thing you'd want to hear if you're in my position. The rustling wasn't constant, just every 30 seconds or so, like something was matching my pace. I'd stop, and it would stop too. I'd start walking, and there it was again. I kept telling myself it was probably a deer, but I'd hiked enough times to know that deer don't follow people like that. I kept going, but at that point, I was pretty sure I was being stalked by something. And then, all at once, the rustling turned into movement all around me. It was a worst-case scenario. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. I was surrounded on all sides by a pack of wolves. 6 or 7 of them, if I had to guess. Some of them were snarling at me, and some of them were just staring. But it was clear to me that, to them, I was a meal. I wasn't going to go down without a fight, though. I had my knife out, even though I knew the odds were stacked against me. I remember thinking, this is it. This is actually how I'm going to die. Alone in the woods because I was too stubborn to stick to the marked trails. I was trying to decide if I should make myself big or stay still or what, when every single wolf suddenly went rigid. All at once, too. Not like they were reacting to each other, but rather all reacting to something else. Their ears shot up and they all looked in the same direction, somewhere over my shoulder. And then they just scattered. Scattered as in full-on sprint in the opposite direction from where they'd been looking, almost like they were the ones being hunted. That's when the fear started setting in for real. Until that point, it had just been a wicked adrenaline rush, which makes sense given the life and death scenario I thought I was in. But once I was alone again, I started getting the creeps. The first thing I noticed after the wolves scampered away was that the woods were completely silent. No wind, no birds, no critters, nothing. It was like someone had flipped a switch in there. It was still light out, but things felt a little dimmer, sort of how your vision fades when you're lightheaded or right before you're about to pass out. But the worst part by far was why the wolves had run off in the first place. I mean, they had been scared of something, that much was obvious, but whatever could have scared off an entire pack of wolves from a long distance away, I couldn't imagine. I needed to keep moving, but I felt really unsettled, even in the daylight. I kind of wanted to follow the wolves, but I was pretty certain I had been walking in the right direction to begin with, so I was at a crossroads. Follow the wolves just to potentially get encircled again and get even more lost, or continue in the right direction and possibly encounter whatever it was that had scared them off. An impossible choice. I ultimately decided to keep walking in the direction I thought would take me out of the woods, which meant walking toward whatever it was that the wolves had been freaked out by. My logic was I could waste an hour walking the way the wolves had come from, only to turn around anyway and have to walk back in the dark, or just bite my tongue and walk that way while I still had daylight. So that's what I did. Maybe 20 minutes later, I saw what looked like a clearing up ahead. For a second, I thought it might have been a campsite. I could see what looked like a fire ring, but as I got closer, I realized it was wrong. All wrong. There were symbols carved into the trees surrounding the clearing, not initials or trail markers. These were intentional, deep cuts forming patterns I didn't recognize. It gets worse though. Things were hanging from the branches on what looked like leather cords. Some looked like bones. Small ones, maybe from birds or rodents. Others were metal, rusted, and twisted into shapes that hurt to look at. The fire pit in the center wasn't just a ring of stones. The stones were delicately stacked on top of one another, like structures. There was weird stuff in the fire pit, too. Pieces of cloth, what looked like jewelry, and other objects I couldn't really identify. But here's what made me really freak out. The smoke. There was this thick, black smoke that was just hanging in the air about 6 feet from the ground. It wasn't moving or dissipating, and it didn't look like it was coming from the fire pit either. It was just there. I really wish I could say it was just leftover smoke from the fire pit. The fire pit didn't even look like it had been used recently. I stood at the edge of that clearing. I was frozen to the spot. For some reason, I just couldn't look away from that smoke. My eyes kept tracking back to it, even when I tried focusing on something else. I really have trouble describing the feeling. but it felt like I was looking through a window at something instead of just being there. Like, it felt like I was standing at my kitchen window looking out into the backyard instead of actually being in the backyard. I don't really know what that means, but that's what it felt like. There was this feeling building in my chest, like grief and terror mixed together, but for some reason that hadn't happened yet. It was almost like my body was mourning something in advance. I've never felt anything like it before or since. I must have stood there for 5 minutes just staring at that smoke before something in my brain finally kicked back online. And no, the smoke didn't dissipate in that time. It just stayed there. I finally worked up the strength to turn around and run. I didn't walk or jog, I literally ran. I was overwhelmed with fear. I didn't know what I was running from, but there was this feeling in my gut that told me I needed to get out of the woods. My memory kind of gets foggy after that. I think it's because of how scared I was. So scared that my instincts took over, but part of me thinks the reason my memory faded was somehow connected to whatever the hell was in the woods. The smoke, or the thing that caused the smoke, or something else entirely. I don't know. The next thing I remember is it being dark out, meaning I must have been in those woods for another good hour or so. I was drenched in sweat and, strangely, freezing cold at that point, but I was nearly out of the woods. I was approaching my car. I got in and drove off without another thought, and that was that. I never reported what I found. What would I even say? I couldn't find that clearing again if I tried, and that's even if I remembered things clearly, which I didn't. This will forever be one of those experiences that just doesn't have an explanation. When I told my dad about what happened, he just said that everyone has that one experience sooner or later. Well, this is mine, and the thing that I still think about from time to time is not how those wolves behaved, how that campsite looked, or even that impossible smoke that just hung in the air. It's the memory loss. From all the research I've done, scary moments get remembered better, not worse, so I have no choice but to think that everything that happened that day was connected. Back when I was younger, me and my friends loved to go camping. Once we got our licenses at 16, we were out almost every weekend camping in new spots. Our parents didn't really care as long as we were able to protect ourselves. For this reason, my dad let us borrow one of his guns. It was a Taurus G2C. This happened when we were 18 and seniors in high school. In February, me and my girl Megan, my friend Colin and his girlfriend Anne were gonna drive to Arkansas and backpack the Ozarks to look at some natural waterfalls. It was a 9-hour drive from where we lived, so we left early and made it there around 7 p.m. We set up camp at one of the setup sites for the night since it was late and we were tired. My girl and I were sharing a tent, and Colin and his girl were sharing another. I had the gun in my tent. Nothing happened on the first night. The next morning, we woke up and made breakfast and drove to the start of the trail. We were gonna hike to a waterfall and then go find a place to set up camp. On the hike to the waterfall, Anne kept saying she saw someone standing still and staring at her, but he had been following and she hadn't seen him move. So we stopped to look, and we saw a man quickly run away. Colin yelled at him to fuck off or we'll kick his ass, mostly probably for show to impress his girl. We were capable of defending ourselves though if needed. We continued the hike and didn't see him again. We eventually made it to the waterfall, and there we had lunch and took pictures. After about 2 hours, we decided to go find a place to camp before it got dark. While we were looking for a place to set up camp, I noticed a freakishly tall, skinny woman staring at us. She had to be at least 6'5". It genuinely freaked me out. I pointed her out, and everyone else got unsettled too. We yelled at her to leave us alone and told her we had a gun. She turned around and walked away. We decided to hike further since we were all creeped out. We had no idea if the two weirdos were connected somehow. After another hour, we found a nice spot next to a small flowing creek with a relatively deep pool of water. So we decided to get in the water and relax. While we were splashing around, we talked about the earlier incidents and joked that they were probably hillbillies on drugs. When the sun started to set, we decided to get out and make dinner. We brought chicken breast to grill, rice and vegetables to boil, and some potatoes.
We always ate well on our campouts. While I was cooking, Colin set up his tent and helped me with mine. I finished cooking, and we ate before cracking open some of the alcohol we brought. I was, and still am, a pretty heavy smoker, so I brought some weed and papers to roll up. We wanted to have a good time since we put a lot of money into this trip. We told stories and laughed in our intoxicated state. It got to a point where Colin fell out of his chair and just laid on the ground laughing. We did this late into the night and eventually went to our tents. Megan and I were messing around in our tent when we suddenly heard someone laughing outside. At first, I thought it was Colin laughing at us for some reason, so I yelled, "What's so funny?" Colin yelled back, "That wasn't me." That sank my soul and immediately sobered me up. I grabbed the gun, rushed out of the tent, and fired a few shots into the air, yelling for whoever it was to leave us alone or I'd shoot them. That seemed to do the trick because I heard footsteps running away. We moved our tents closer together and decided to have one person stay up at a time as lookout. The next day, we debated going home early, but ultimately decided against it. We were sure we'd scared off whoever it was, so we planned to hike somewhere closer to the exit and camp for one final night. After breakfast, we packed up camp and started the hike back. During the hike, we ran into some other hikers and told them what had happened. They were freaked out too. We chatted for a bit, then continued on. When we stopped for lunch, I realized those were the only other people we'd seen so far, despite there being a ton of cars in the parking lot earlier. After lunch, we continued down the trail, and after about 6 miles, we decided to set up camp. We were around 3 miles from the nearest exit. We pitched our tents and cooked steak and potatoes for dinner. We ate, drank, and smoked again before heading to the tents. In the middle of the night, I woke up needing to pee, so I stepped out of the tent. Out of paranoia, I made sure to bring the gun. While I was peeing, I heard leaves crunching nearby. My heart immediately stopped. I grabbed the gun, finished up, pulled up my pants, and turned on my headlamp. The beam revealed the man from the day before, standing in the distance, holding a machete. I could see him clearly this time. Long, dirty black hair, and super lanky. I screamed and raised the gun as he started charging at me. I fired off every shot I had and must have hit him somewhere, because I heard him yell and saw him fall. By now, Colin, Megan, and Ann were all awake. I told them to pack up. We needed to leave fast. I didn't want to involve the police since I wasn't sure if I could get charged for something, and honestly, his life didn't seem worth it. We didn't bother packing the tents since there wasn't time. We grabbed our bags and practically ran the final 3 miles, making it back to the cars in under an hour. We climbed in, locked the doors, and decided to sleep in the car for the night. We covered the windows and tried to get some rest. When we woke up in the morning, we left immediately and stopped for breakfast at a diner in a small town. We never called the cops, and I'm still conflicted about whether we should have. This happened years ago, and no reports about it ever came out. So for all I know, those psychopaths are still out there.
When I was a little younger, I enjoyed off-road biking, like on bike trails in the woods. Living in rural Massachusetts, I always did a lot of exploring, usually on my bike. One of those many days that I was feeling adventurous, I got on my bike and rode down Irving Street, the road my parents' old house sat on. This road went a long way down, and it basically just ran through trees in all directions, with the occasional farmland. I'd usually cut off this road onto an intersecting road, or I'd just ride into the woods through one of the dirt paths. This particular day, I kept going further than usual on Irving Street, hoping to find these cool bike trails one of my friends told me about a few days prior. He said the entrance would be a little past a deer crossing sign. I didn't find the sign though, but I did find a trail that veered off the road into the woods. It was wide enough to easily navigate on my bike. So I turned off Irving Street and onto the dirt trail, which immediately dropped to a decline, allowing me to instantly pick up speed. I still don't know if these were the trails my friend was actually talking about or not, but they were fun to ride on, as they were very hilly and windy. I just rode around the apparent maze of trails, having fun exploring. Until I started to get thirsty and realized I had forgotten my water bottle at home. Of course. So I decided to cut my bike ride short and start looking for the way back to the road. I rode around the trails trying to remember which way I came from, but it was literally a maze. Irving Street was a very quiet road, so hoping to hear the sound of traffic was kind of pointless. This was back when flip phones were a thing, and I didn't even have a cell phone yet, honestly, so I couldn't exactly just whip out my iPhone to look for directions. Then I realized I wasn't alone in the woods. There was a woman not too far away from me, just standing there watching me, kinda creepily. She was older, probably 60s. I called out to her asking for help because I'm lost. She replied in a low voice, yet I could somehow make out what she said. She said, "You shouldn't be in here." I apologized and asked for directions one more time, but she said, "Get out now," in a disturbingly sadistic way. I wasn't staying there another second. I rode off down the trail, resuming trying to find the road again. But from that moment forward, every 5 minutes or so, I'd see that lady, not too far away, always looking at me. This went on for some time, to the point that I got so uncomfortable that I hid behind this giant stone for a while once I lost sight of her. I waited for a long time, and it was getting dark quickly. I swear I was starting to freak out. Another half hour of trying to navigate this maze, and it was getting too dark to even make my way around on the bike. I could barely see the trails now. I was so tired I had to sit and take a breather, but something in my gut told me I was being watched. Like, you ever just get that feeling that you can sense the presence of someone else around you? I was right, because the old woman's voice broke the silence. She said, "Come here," but in a low voice, almost a whisper. This meant she was currently closer to me than I was comfortable with. I couldn't see a thing. I held myself together until she started making these cackling sounds. And that's when I lost it. I threw my bike to the floor. That was the last time I ever saw it. I started screaming, running through the woods. The nightmare of trying to find my way out of the woods finally ended when I saw the lights from a house not too far away. I ran as fast as I could to it and rang the doorbell. An older man answered the door, and I asked him for help, for some water and a ride or something. Thankfully he was nice and happily offered to give me a ride to my house. He seemed particularly freaked out when I told him about the creepy woman in the woods. He said 3 people had gone missing in our county just that month alone. He also knew the trails I was talking about and said they were not privately owned by any woman, making the situation even weirder. I of course was furious about leaving my bike behind, but I had to get out of there. That woman had been stalking me riding on my bike for potentially hours. She was basically right in front of me in that pitch blackness. Browsing the app Letgo one day, I came across a listing for a free bike. It was a black Trek brand bike, which is a top bicycle brand. At the time, my bike was an old piece of crap Schwinn that I hadn't used in years, so obviously this listing caught my eye. I contacted the lister, asking for more details like if the bike was actually free and where and when would I be able to pick it up. The lister responded relatively quickly, saying yes, it's for free, and said first come, first served, but to hurry because a lot of people were contacting him. I asked him for the location or address, and he sent me coordinates. That should have been my first red flag. Who sends coordinates? I asked him, how am I supposed to track the coordinates? He said download an app on my phone. Then I asked, is there a nearby address you could just give me? He said not really, because he was keeping his address to himself for privacy reasons, and there weren't really any nearby notable locations. So he gave me a phone number to text him, told me his name was Gene, and we set a meet time of 6 p.m., as that worked for both of our schedules. I downloaded this GPS coordinates tracker app, and the coordinates led me on a 25-minute drive. As I got closer and there was nothing but woods on either side of me, I started to wonder where exactly these coordinates would be taking me. I was now 2 minutes away, and it seemed I was as far as I was going to get with my car. Exactly what I was worried about came true. I'd have to cut through the woods to get to these coordinates. I parked my car on the side of the road, but before heading into the woods like a clueless madman, I texted Gene saying I was parked on the side of a desolate road next to woods on either side, and that the app was pointing me in the direction of the woods. He replied back a minute later saying, yeah, this area is sketchy that way. It would probably be better if you just cut through the woods instead of looking for the trail.
If you follow the direction it tells you, you'll find a huge clearing in the woods where I'm waiting with the bike. I already drove this far. I figured I might as well just see this through, even if I was finding this increasingly bizarre. I started my way into the woods, swiping twigs and leaves out of my way as I did my best to make it through the thick woods. I wasn't dressed for this at all, though. I did this for probably 4 minutes until I saw I was approaching the coordinates on my phone, but I didn't see any clearing in the woods ahead of me. Something wasn't right, so before going any further, I texted Jean again, saying I'm just about to be there but can't see the clearing in the woods. I said maybe I have the wrong coordinates. A minute passed without an answer, so I tried to call him, but it went to voicemail after 1 ring. Then he texted back saying, I have bad service, I can't talk on the phone. I asked him where should I go, I think I'm lost. He didn't answer. I waited and waited, hoping he would, but nothing. After a couple more minutes, I called it quits. I started to feel like this was all fake from the start, and I was becoming paranoid of my surroundings. The sun was going down, so I hurried back in the direction I came. I thought I would be followed, but as I looked back behind me constantly, I didn't see anyone. I made it back to my car to make a shocking discovery. All 4 of my tires were slashed. My body entered a fight or flight mode before even seeing who did this. I approached the door of the car, wondering if I should hide inside and lock the door, but as I looked into the car, I could see someone laying on the back floor hiding. I chose my flight response. I sprinted all the way down the road, saying screw the piece of crap car. I heard my car door open and slam shut. When I turned around, I just briefly saw someone running into the woods. I took out my phone and of course called 911, asking them to please hurry to my location that I'd be running down the road. 15 minutes or so later, a police car finally approached me with its lights on. They escorted me back to the scene of the crime, my car, and took a police report, which included every detail like the slashed tires and the text conversation. They accompanied me as I waited for my roadside assistance company to come and tow my car. I was brought safely to a shop where they changed my tires on the spot. The only thing I worried about was that man Gene getting my license plate number and possibly tracking me with it, but to this day he hasn't, so I like to think I'm safe from that. When I was a teenager, before my friends and I had our driver's licenses, our main means of transportation was our bikes. Our town isn't that big, and all of us live a short bike ride away conveniently. We'd often go for bike rides during the day, just around the neighborhood for fun, but we really liked going for bike rides at night, especially in the town area on Main Street, by the bars and hubbub. It was a Friday night, pretty late, probably approaching midnight. I biked to Main Street with my friends Jackson and Roddy. It was a 15-minute bike ride from us. There were still some people out walking around down the street. Of course, we were only like 15 or 16, so we weren't actually going into any bars, just riding around for the vibe. We hung out in one of the parking lots on the street that we'd often just chill at. At that hour, there weren't many cars left in the parking lot. It was quieting down for the night. Roddy was the one to notice when a car pulled into the lot with its lights off and kind of parked conspicuously, in a way that it was facing us. After a few minutes, Jackson pointed out that he was pretty sure the guy in the car looked like he was watching us, so we started to migrate our hangout elsewhere. We biked out the exit of the parking lot and back onto Main Street, and the car also left the parking lot shortly after us. We all knew just by a single glance at each other, and didn't even have to speak a single word to know to start pedaling fast down the road. The car trailed us, but not too close behind. The driver must have somehow thought we weren't aware of it. He still had his lights off, not to mention. I said let's get to my house instead of just aimlessly biking around trying to lose him in the streets. My house was the closest. It took us only like 5 minutes to get there. Before the car could turn the corner onto my street, we hurried to my backyard gate and rushed inside before he could see. We entered my house through the back door. My dad was still awake, surprisingly, in the living room. He was watching a movie. We all asked him if he could check outside if the car was anywhere out there. He stepped outside for a second, then came back inside saying the coast was clear. He said we were smart to bike away as soon as we were suspicious. Anyway, my dad went to bed after his movie, and usually he wanted my friends out by that point, so Jackson and Roddy left on their bikes. I swear it wasn't even 20 minutes later that I got out of my bed after hearing something from the backyard. I went to my window and looked down to the backyard.
I lifted my window up a little more, very quietly, just to better hear the sound. It was like this little clicking, rustling sound that would repeat every 4 seconds. I stuck my head out the window, and I saw the shed door was open, but that didn't answer what that clicking sound was. I went to my dad's room and woke him up. He came with me first to my room, where I showed him the shed door, and then made him listen for the sounds. But now the sounds had stopped. The two of us rushed downstairs to the back door, where we flicked on the backyard light. My dad yanked the back door open and stormed into the yard, yelling for whoever was out there to come out. I worried about him going in the shed alone, so I came with him. But besides all the tools and other basic shed equipment, bikes and other shit like that, there was no one hiding in there. We found out on the way back inside the house that the clicking sounds I was hearing was someone trying to tamper with the outside lock, as the entire door handle was completely scraped up and almost ruined. The lock still worked, and that was only the storm door. There was still another door with a working lock behind it, so it was still safe. My dad told me to just go to bed. He'd stay downstairs for the night and keep the outside lights on. He said he had the police come the next morning before I woke up. I'm 99% sure it was that man who followed us in the car. I don't know for sure how or when he found out where I lived, and I'm not sure why he gave up on busting the lock. Anything I say would just be a guess. When my dad was around 50, he got an African Grey. He always loved parrots his whole life, so I was happy for him to get one after his retirement. He named the bird Kevin. My dad taught Kevin a whole vocabulary of words, and he actually trained him to understand the meaning behind certain words, like hello, what's up, food, thank you, good, and a few others. My dad passed away at 70, and with that came the time to figure out amongst my siblings and I what would happen to Kevin. My brother and sister didn't want the responsibility of taking Kevin into their homes, plus their spouses were against it too. But I couldn't bear the idea of giving him away to a new home. Kevin was and is one of my last connections to my dad. In a sense, that was his best friend, so I decided I would take him into my home. I put his cage in the den of my house. My house doesn't have a basement, so the den is considered the lowest level of the house. Kevin is a moderately noisy bird. He can be a chatterbox some hours of the day, usually earlier on. But later in the day and at night he quiets down. When he's too noisy, I'll throw a blanket over his cage, and that normally quiets him down. I watch TV in the den at night to keep him company. Then around 10 I'll migrate to my room to let him go to sleep. That's pretty much the backstory behind Kevin. I've been taking care of him for 2 years now, so I know exactly how he behaves and when he's acting out of the ordinary. Speaking of out of the ordinary, there was one night in December around 11 p.m. that Kevin started making sounds while I was trying to sleep. I sleep with the door open since I live alone and need to be able to hear anything if something's going on in the house. Hearing him making his squawking noises past dark, especially this late at night, is unusual beyond doubt, and something was irritating him. I went down to the den to see what was bothering him. He was wide awake on the lower perch of the two in the cage. He looked at me and was saying things like hello and what's up and his name. All the while he was nodding his head up and down, moving his whole body in the process as if he were dancing. I tried to feed him, but he didn't eat, so I covered him with the blanket, hoping he would stop. I was in the kitchen when I stopped inside because he was still making the noises, and I had a feeling he wasn't going to stop. Having work the next day, I couldn't afford to lose sleep because of him. I really didn't know what to do. I'm still to this day not exactly a bird expert. I went back downstairs and uncovered him. He was still doing his little dance, bobbing his head and body and making his distressed sounds. It didn't click with me until thinking I heard something in the pantry closet a few feet away from his cage. I walked over to it and hovered my hand over the light switch to the pantry, which was outside of the door. The door has one of those big glass panels that many pantry doors have, so when I flicked the light switch, I saw the outline of a body on the inside. My fight or flight response kicked in, and I chose fight. I opened the door screaming, trying to get my adrenaline rushing, and I grabbed the man in the pantry closet out and threw him to the floor. He tried to fight back, but I easily overpowered him and had him in what I could best describe as a chokehold. He was a 50-something-year-old homeless-looking man with a smell to match it. I yelled at him, "Who are you? Why are you in my house?" He tried grabbing my face to possibly gouge my eyes or something, but I continued to wring his neck and punch him. During all of this, Kevin was going berserk in his cage. When the man on the floor seemed weak enough, I literally sprinted for the nearest phone and came right back and kept him on the ground while I called 911. The man was taken to jail, but he had no ID on him, nothing. He was homeless and had nothing to his name, and as such he was considered what some people call judgment-proof, meaning even if I tried to sue him, I wouldn't get anything from him. He had raided my pantry closet that night and had opened jars of peanut butter, boxes of cookies and crackers, and all sorts of other boxed and canned foods. If it weren't for my dad's parrot, I don't know what else that man would have taken or done in my house. I'm grateful for Kevin, and I like to think part of my dad is watching over me and that bird. This story takes place when I was a junior in high school. For context, here's a little background information. Back in the day, I was a pretty involved student, took all the hard classes, and was in a few varsity sports. In one of these ways, I was always busy and didn't have much time for myself, and part of me was thankful for that. It provided me an escape from a world where my parents had recently parted ways and my older brother had just gone to college. It was just me and my little brother then. He also was a swimmer and a smart kid in his own right. We were really similar, even to this day, but probably because of the stresses our family situation put on us at the time, we didn't get along, near at all. One of those wet winter days in the Midwest, I'd put in my time at school and swim, and I still had to sit down for several hours of homework. This time I had to write an essay for some advanced class that I wasn't really interested in. I dropped my swim bag at the door when I got home and looked around my house to see if anyone was home. Empty. Dad must be out with Reese at swim practice. His club team had the slot at the pool after the high school team was done. I popped in a mouthful of Cheez-Its and headed down to the basement to my office to get some schoolwork done. The house was a middle-class 2-story with an unfinished basement, with the exception of what I referred to as my office. From a career past, my dad used to work from home, but no longer did. I was the only one who used this place, so my family, or what was left of it, just called it Quinn's office. So I made my way across the concrete floors and unattached carpet samples down there to the one finished-out room in the basement. I flicked on the CFL light. It was like any other night after practice. I still had hours of homework to do. So I turned on the computer and started typing away. I was typing for what seemed like an hour, trying to bring to words to what the concept of hedonism and the picture of Dorian Gray meant to me as best I could, or as convincingly as I could. Out of the dark, I heard my little brother call out to me, "Quinny, Quinny, come up." Almost reflexively, I called back to him, "Reese, I'm working, what do you need?" We would yell through the house like brothers do, but it took me a minute to realize I didn't hear him come home. I got no response, only for a couple minutes though. Again, I heard my little brother's voice sing out, "Quinny, Quinny, come up." It felt strange hearing those words carry across the dark, concrete floor. He's supposed to be at swim practice. I called back out to him, asking if he needed anything, but again, I received no answer. I thought about just starting my essay again, but the family situation was delicate at best, and I didn't want to be in trouble if my little brother actually needed something. I made the decision to get up and go find out for myself. I bounded up the basement staircase, the only way a high schooler can, and I called out again for my brother. "Reese, what's up? I'm really busy." I checked all around the main floor looking for my little brother, or even signs he was home. No shoes, no backpack, so he wasn't home, and there was no car in the driveway either. The only reason my dad would be gone right now would be to pick him up. Satisfied, I turned back for the stairs, when I heard my little brother's voice ring out, "Quinny, Quinny, come up." This time every hair on my body stood on end. It just didn't make sense. He had to be at practice, and if he really needed me, he would have come to me. I go to the base of the second floor stairs and called out to him one more time, "Reese, what's going on? Are you okay?" For a minute, no answer. "Reese, I'm really busy. Can you tell me what's up?" It's quiet for way too long as I stared up the dark staircase. Logically, I had no reason to believe anyone was up there, until I heard Reese's voice calmly speak this time and not call out in his sing-song way those same 4 words. "Quinny, Quinny, come up." "What?" I asked under my breath. I couldn't comprehend the situation. I did quick inventory of any probable scenario. Break-in, wrong voice. A prank? I would have seen something at this point. It had to be Reese, and maybe helping him would make me a good brother. So I began up the stairs. My heart pounded with each step, and I was about to make the landing to the dark second floor. Then I heard the buzz of the garage door motor. I ran back down the stairs and looked out the window. It was my father's sedan, and him and my little brother got out. I stumbled from the window to the hall where they would enter, and I felt my heart almost stop beating. I collapsed on the floor and just started to cry uncontrollably. This was like 15 years ago now when I was a kid. I was with my best friend Jackson at some abandoned family resort or bungalow colony type place in New York. It was off a main road and then down a private dirt path driveway entrance, and it was a rather large property with a bunch of old abandoned buildings including at least 10 small bungalows, a main hall, a few bathroom stations, and an indoor pool house. Along with that was an outdoor pool, a shuffleboarding area, and a kid's playground. Everything was old, run down, and with tall, overgrown grass growing over it. We found this place accidentally one time walking down Route 209, but we didn't explore it that day. We came back another night. By the time we went, it was past sunset. The sun was kissing the sky goodnight. It was getting very dark, but we didn't want to come during the day in fear of getting caught and getting charged with trespassing. We brought along walkie-talkies and flashlights with us to communicate to each other when we'd split up. We started looking around the bungalows together. Most of them looked the same and were relatively small. 1 or 2 beds each, a small kitchen, and 1 bathroom each. Some of them had these little living room areas. Halfway looking through these bungalows, I split off from Jackson because he was moving kind of slow. I tried to enter the building that looked to be the main hall or office or something, but every entrance was locked. I walkie-talkied Jackson to tell him that the big building was locked. He didn't walkie-talkie back. I wondered if I was out of range from where he was. 2 minutes later, I found myself at one of the 2 bathroom buildings. It was probably a 400 square foot building. There were no doors to the building though. It was unusual. It just had 2 big openings, one for the men's room, one for the women's room. I remember the signs being faded and worn out looking. Then I saw these red tracks on the dirty old concrete bathroom floor. Now I'm not going to sit here and say they looked like bloody footprints, but I couldn't explain what these red marks could be then, and I still can't say for certain now. Regardless, it was pitch black inside that bathroom around that corner, and that was the first building I was scared to enter. I tried walkie-talking to Jackson again, hoping he was in range this time. I pressed the button on the walkie and said, "Yo, where are you?" When I let go, I heard the beep sound that the receiving walkie makes after getting a message from inside the bathroom. It gave me a near heart attack. Then I thought Jackson must already be in there, hence the red-looking footsteps. I called his name, and it echoed into the bathroom. I was actually about to step into the bathroom thinking he was hiding from me, pranking me, when I heard Jackson's voice call out from the distance behind me, outside in the darkness of the night. I heard him getting closer. Couldn't see him in the dark, but he obviously saw my light, so I yelled back, "I found your walkie-talkie." I started stepping into the bathroom, but then he said back, "Don't go in there, I never went in there." This is when I turned around and hurried right out of there. I pressed and released the talk button really quick on my walkie, causing the beep again from inside that pitch black women's room. Jackson and I looked at each other for half a second, then began dashing in the direction we came. We made it back to Route 209 and had to stop to catch our breaths. This is when Jackson told me that inside one of the bungalows he went into, he tried walkie-talking me, but I wasn't answering, meaning we must have been out of range. But then he heard a noise from the living area of the bungalow. As he turned around, his flashlight revealed an older woman almost running towards him. He dropped his walkie-talkie and flashlight and ran out from the bungalow. He ran in the dark and hid, refraining from making noise in fear of being followed. He hid for a questionable amount of time before looking around and seeing my flashlight across the field, over at the bathrooms. The most likely explanation to me was that some cracked-out drug addict was hiding or living in that abandoned bungalow and for whatever reason lunged at Jackson and picked up his walkie-talkie. What she was doing in that bathroom, who knows? Maybe drugs, maybe the bathroom in the bungalow didn't work. But what I don't know is why was there a trail of what looked like blood in there? Those are my theories, but I can't explain all of it away. And that's the scariest part. One of the benefits of my job is that I get to travel all around the world. It's taken me to some amazing destinations like Greece and Italy, although most of the time I stay within the US. A few years ago, my job took me to a mountainous region in the northeastern United States called the Adirondacks. If anyone's familiar with the area, you know what I'm talking about when I say it's beautiful in the fall. The leaves change and it makes the mountains look like you're in a fairy tale or something. It's incredible. Usually, my job pays for a hotel, but this time I wanted to spend some much-needed alone time in the mountains. So I went through Airbnb to find a secluded mountain home for the weekend. I found a beautiful home that was nestled in the trees and had an incredible view that looked down part of a mountain from the back deck. This place was exactly what I was looking for. There were a few trails right by the house that I could jog on in the morning, and as I said, the back deck had an amazing view that I could just sit and relax and take in all the scenic beauty. For privacy reasons, I'm not going to reveal the name of the woman who posted the property on Airbnb. My work obligations were only in the late afternoon and early evening, so I could spend most of my time at the house. I got to the house later on Friday, and I didn't do much except have a few drinks on the deck. I called it an early night. I woke up around 6 a.m. on Saturday and went for a jog on the trails that surround the house. You know that horrible feeling that you have when you're being watched? Well, I had that feeling for my entire jog. I blamed it on the anxiety of just being alone in the wilderness, since I'm technically a city person. After my jog, I took a shower and just hung out around the house for a few hours. I kept hearing weird noises, but once again, I just kept telling myself that it's my anxiety. I was in a wooden cabin up in the mountains. Of course, there were going to be all sorts of noises. I left the house a little after 3:30 in the afternoon and made my way into the town. I met my coworkers at a local restaurant, and we took care of our business. After all of that, we decided to go out for a few drinks. I didn't want to admit it to myself or anyone else, but I was freaked out to go back to the house. I don't know if it was the feeling of being watched and all the strange noises, or if the remote location was just a little too remote for me. Whatever it was, I was happy to take my time getting back. I even offered to have a little after party at the house, but my coworkers decided to turn in a little before 10 p.m. I put the fear beside me and made my way back to the house. I spent the entire drive trying to communicate with the irrational part of my brain that was freaked out. I repeated to myself over and over again that it's just a house, houses make noises, and I'm safe. I'll lock the doors and triple check that I've locked them before I go to bed. I got back to the house at about 10:45. I was relieved how tired I was. Even with all my nerves, I was confident I could fall asleep. I did indeed check all the locks 3 times and then tried to go to bed. I spent the next few hours tossing and turning. I would drift away for a little bit and then hear something outside and be wide awake for 20 minutes. I tried turning on some music with my phone to drown out some of the noise, but the distraction of the music was keeping me awake. It was only a matter of time before I started hearing the noise again, even with the music playing. It was a little after midnight when I decided to go smoke a cigarette and contemplate just leaving early since I was already wide awake. I grabbed my coat, my phone, and my cigs and made my way downstairs. The stairs came out into the living room, and if you turned left at the bottom of the stairs, you would see a large open room that served as a dining room and a kitchen. The back of the room had a sliding door that led to the back deck, which was my current destination. I took one step into the dark room, and I thought I could see a shadow in the kitchen that was causing some of the moonlight from the window to be obstructed. I felt that horrible pit in my stomach turn into a cyclone as I just stood there. I kept telling myself that it was just shadows and it was nothing to fear. I decided to confront my fear and turn the light on, and the image of what I saw is still burned into my brain and is one of the scariest images I've ever seen. Standing in the kitchen, clear as day, was a man. He was probably 6 feet tall with long, shaggy hair and a thick beard.
I would say he was late 30s if I had to guess. There was a brief standoff where neither one of us did or said anything. It couldn't have been longer than 10 or 15 seconds, but that specific moment felt like it lasted hours. He was hunched over a bit and just staring at me. With no notice, the man lunged at me with a full sprint. Thankfully, there was a counter in the middle of the kitchen, so he had to go around the counter, which gave me the time to run back to my room and lock the door. I realized that this is what stupid people do in horror movies, but at that moment, it seemed like the best possible solution. For starters, I didn't think I could make it to the front or back door without getting caught first, and if I was able to escape, I didn't have my keys, and I didn't know if this man had a weapon or something, so I wasn't about to just run aimlessly into the woods. My room seemed like the safest place because I could lock the door, call 911, and just hope that the door's integrity would last until the police showed up. So that's just what I did. I locked the door, ran to the closet, and called the police. I told them the address and to hurry. The woman from this dispatch stayed on the line and told me that someone would be there soon. While I was waiting, the man started to beat on the door. They seemed like violent strikes on the wood of the door. After each strike, he would say the weirdest things, like he kept saying that he loves me and that he's changed. I got a good look at this man in the kitchen, and I knew without a doubt that I had no idea who this guy was. I started yelling back to the man that I didn't know him and that he had the wrong woman, but it was like he couldn't hear me. He just kept yelling about how much he loved me and that he needed me back. I could hear the door starting to break. When I looked, I could see his fist starting to penetrate the wood of the door from him striking it repeatedly. I'm so grateful that I heard sirens at this point. I heard several cars pull in, and they came at the perfect time. Just as the man was able to get his entire hand through the door, I heard a loud crash accompanied by the sound of the police yelling at the man. At the same time, I decided to jump out of the bedroom window since it led to a small roof that I figured I could try to scale down. The crash I had heard right before was the police tackling the man to the ground just as he was about to get into the bedroom. I flagged one of the officers from the roof, and he helped me get down. The police arrested the man, and he continued yelling incoherently as they put him in the back of a squad car. They called the owner of the house, and that's when we finally started to get a few answers. This guy was the ex-fiancé of the woman who owns the house. Apparently, the guy had gone off the grid for a while after a bad breakup. The most disturbing part of all of this was the guy had been living in one of the closets of the house for a few days. Inside the closet, they found a bunch of beer cans and snack foods. I don't know why he didn't act sooner, but I'm so thankful he didn't, because this could have ended a lot worse for me. If I hadn't decided to get up for a smoke at that moment, this story could have had a much more tragic ending. The police told me that he had a knife from the kitchen inside his belt loop. It made me think to myself, I probably caught him in the act of getting the knife. The owner of the house felt horrible, and last I knew, the man was going to jail, but who knows. It's just so scary for me to think that I checked the lock 3 times, and it didn't even matter because this creep was already in the house. I guess you never know what can happen. This may be the only time in history that going outside for a smoke saved a life. Okay, so this is a weird story. I was freaked out in the moment, but for a while, I thought maybe I was just overreacting. It was almost 2 years ago, and I interviewed for a job that was in another state. It was about a 5-hour drive. Instead of driving home after the interview, my soon-to-be wife suggested that I find an Airbnb to stay at for the night. I'm hopeless when it comes to apps like this, and I have no idea how to find a good place. She downloaded the app for me, found a place that looked nice, and it was only about a 10-minute drive from where the interview was being held. I booked the spot and got myself ready for the interview. The guy who owned the house was really nice. I was messaging him about why I was coming down, and he told me that if I wanted to, I could get into the house early that day so I could get myself ready and prepared for the interview, instead of driving for 5 hours and then going straight into the interview. I thought that was really nice. The owner sent me the code to get in and gave me all the instructions on how to lock the door. Well, it's literally one button, but still good to know since I had never used one of those keypad locks before this. My interview was at 3. I had more than enough time to shower and get myself mentally prepared for the interview. When I plugged in the interview address into the GPS, it said 9 minutes, so I planned on giving myself at least 30 minutes in case I got lost or hit traffic. After the interview, I grabbed some tacos and went back to the house. I thought the interview went well, But, of course, I spent the next few hours second-guessing every answer I gave. I tend to do that when I'm nervous. I didn't do much of anything that night except eat, talk to my girl on the phone, and watch a movie. I know all these places are cleaned, but I still find it weird to sleep in someone else's bed. I'm just weird like that. It's why I don't travel a lot or go on vacation. I planned on sleeping on the couch and heading out first thing in the morning. The living room was cozy. It had a big, fluffy wraparound couch that was in front of a fireplace. Above the fireplace was a huge TV. Just to sweeten the deal, the room also had surround sound. I was perfectly content just staying in this room all night and watching movies until I dozed off and went to bed. Around 11 that night, I grabbed a blanket from one of the beds and I threw on Avengers Endgame. I was only about 15 minutes into the movie when I started to fall asleep. That sleep didn't last very long, as I was awoken by the sound of the doorbell. I just laid there for a few minutes and looked around. I didn't know if I was dreaming or if it was the movie or something. Then a few seconds later, the doorbell chimed again. I couldn't believe it. The doorbell was actually ringing. I grabbed my phone and saw that the time said 11:33. I couldn't imagine who would be ringing the doorbell at this hour. My first thought was just to ignore it. Then the bell rang again. Every time it rang, it made my heart basically jump out of my chest. At the fourth ring, I decided I was going to go check it out. I was thinking to myself, what if it were like the police or something? I cautiously made my way to the door, and before opening it, I looked out the front windows that gave me a somewhat view of the person. It was a skinny guy, and he was holding up a small brown bag in his hands. He had his head down and almost looked unresponsive. I went to the door and opened it, but left the screen door shut and locked. The light was dim, so I couldn't get a decent look at the guy. With his head still down, he told me he had my pizza delivery. Clearly, he wasn't holding a pizza. It was a brown paper bag. I politely told him I didn't order a pizza and that he had the wrong address. I shut the door and started heading back to the living room. The doorbell rang again. I marched back to the front door and opened it. Before I could yell "go away" or anything, he just told me again in a bleak and monotone voice that he had my pizza. When I shouted I didn't order a pizza, the guy responded by giving me the address of the house and said the delivery was for this address. I started to shout that it was a mistake and I didn't order pizza, and while I was shouting, I noticed that the guy was grabbing the screen door handle. I know I should have been more freaked out, but I was just annoyed. I slammed the door after yelling at him to go away before I called the police. After I slammed the door, I snuck back to the front window and again crouched down to look at what this guy was doing. He stood there for another minute and walked away. He had a beat-up red sedan of some kind. I couldn't tell what the make was. One of the front headlights was busted. Once I saw him get into the car, I felt a moment of relief. After that ordeal, I was ironically hungry. I grabbed something from the kitchen, and as I was walking back to the living room, I saw lights still shining through the front windows. When I looked outside, this guy was still sitting in the driveway with his one high beam shining through the window. I decided to go upstairs and look out one of the bedroom windows since I would have a much better vantage point. Because the light was so bright, I couldn't see him sitting in the car, but I could see that the car was running. I was still more annoyed than anything else. My two thoughts were either calling the police or going outside and telling this guy to hit the road. I decided that I didn't want to bother the police with something that could be very small and maybe nothing, so instead I'll just go outside and scare the guy into leaving. I threw my shoes on and marched out there like I was an Avenger. When I got to the window of the car, nobody was there. Without thinking, I turned around and ran back to the house, and immediately I locked the door. I even locked the chain on top of the door. I was trying to ask myself why he wouldn't be in the car, but the car was still running. It didn't make sense to me. I grabbed my phone and went upstairs into the bedroom. I tried texting the owner of the house, but I didn't receive a message back from him right away. I continued to look out of the window for several minutes. I contemplated calling the police, but I kept telling myself that this isn't police-worthy and I'm blowing all of this out of proportion. A few minutes later, I looked out the window, and I saw the skinny man get back into his car, and it almost looked like he was coming from the direction of the front door. I watched him finally back out of the driveway, and he appeared to drive down the street and out of sight. I wasn't scared, but I was so on edge that I didn't really sleep. I spent the entire night watching YouTube videos while lying on the floor of the bedroom. At 4 in the morning, I decided to officially get up, shower, and then leave. As I was gathering my things and getting ready to walk out the door, I noticed something horrible. The front door was unlocked and ajar. Because the chain was locked, it wouldn't open any further. I just stood in amazement. I couldn't remember if maybe I left it unlocked by accident after the last incident. I was sure I locked it, but I didn't want to think about the potential alternative. Then it dawned on me that I for sure didn't lock the screen door when I ran inside. As the sun was rising, I made a run for my car just in case, and as I was backing out of the driveway, I noticed on the side of the front porch was the brown paper bag. I ran outside so fast that I didn't even notice it initially. I thought about going to see if anything was inside, but that was a question that, in that moment, I didn't want answered. I drove away, and at the end of the street was a disgusting green house, and in the driveway was an ugly red car with what looked like a broken headlight. It may be a coincidence, but it looked exactly like the car that sat in the driveway the previous night. The owner of the Airbnb messaged me that morning to apologize for missing my message last night and asked how the stay was. I told him about the delivery driver, the car in the driveway, the unlocked door in the morning, and the similar looking red car at the end of the street. He started typing because I could see the dots in the message, and then he never responded after that. I never bothered to look more into the situation until I started telling people the story. When I looked up the house more recently, it's not listed on Airbnb anymore, so I don't know what to think. It was unnerving and a little freaky for sure, but I truly wasn't that scared. I'm more scared now when I think about it because other people seem to think that this was almost some kind of setup. I'm curious to see what people think, if it all could have been just a crazy string of coincidences, or if I was almost a victim of something sinister. Let me start by saying that monsters exist in this world, and they're not ghosts or demons, but very real people who mean you harm. My family still hasn't recovered from the terror we experienced last summer, and I'm worried they may never fully heal. I'll start at the beginning and do my best to tell the story. My wife and I decided to take the kids on a small family vacation. Nothing crazy, just a few nights away at the ocean. I was surprised to see that finding houses on Airbnb was cheaper than the hotels that were available. My wife found this awesome place that wasn't right on the ocean, but it was only a 5-minute walk, and it was way cheaper than staying on the ocean. The house was directly at the back of a dead-end street, and behind the house was a creek, so it felt very private, which was cool. We got to the beach town in the mid-afternoon, and we spent several hours at the beach before heading to the house. My son was 8 and my daughter was 13, and usually they fight constantly, but something about being at the ocean caused them to play together like good siblings. This would probably be the highlight of the trip because things started going downhill after that. We got to the house at 5 and unpacked our bags. The kiddos claimed their rooms, and we all got cleaned up from the beach. My wife brought a bunch of meals to cook instead of us having to go out every night. She loves to cook, which I love. There really is nothing better than a home-cooked meal. The deal is, she cooks and I do the dishes. It seems like a fair trade-off. That night, we stayed up for a few hours and played Uno, and then we eventually went to bed. I slept like a baby that night. I wish I could have said the same thing about my son. The next morning, he looked exhausted at breakfast. The poor kid barely touched his food. When I asked him what was wrong, he just put his head down and didn't say anything. He almost looked embarrassed. After a little bit of prying, he finally caved in and told me what was wrong. He claimed that he saw ghosts the previous night. Yes, you heard me correctly. My 8-year-old son claimed to have seen ghosts. When I asked him to explain more, he told me that he saw the shadows move around in the backyard. He looked out the window and saw several shadows come up to the house and disappear for a while, then eventually go back into the tree line, which was right before the creek. He said one of the shadows even turned around at one point and waved at him. The poor kid was in tears while he was telling me. Whatever he saw, or whatever he thought he saw, it clearly freaked him out. My wife and I, and even my daughter, were giving him the ghosts aren't real talk. It took a little while, but he finally started acting like himself again. We went to the beach that day and had another fun day together, hitting waves and building sandcastles. When we got back to the house, I noticed that the door wasn't locked. I asked my wife if she had locked it, and she wasn't sure. I'm compulsive about locking the door, and unfortunately, she isn't. I would have been more annoyed, but anything of value that we had was with me,
and after a little walk around the house, nothing looked out of place. Another evening of cooking and card games, and then the kids went to bed around 10 p.m. My wife and I stayed up for a little bit longer and had a few drinks. I didn't look at the exact time, but I would say it was nearly midnight when my son knocked on our bedroom door. He could barely talk, and the poor kid was trembling. He said the ghosts are back, and they're in the backyard again. I sprang up and looked out all the windows, and I didn't see anything. I kept asking him to point them out, but he was too scared to even look out the window. The only thing that was admittedly a little weird was that the backyard floodlight was on, but that could have been set off by anything like the wind or even an animal. I spent the next few minutes trying to comfort him and tell him everything was okay. When he finally spoke, he barely got the words out. He said one of the ghosts tapped on his window. He told him that if he screamed, he would hurt his entire family. According to my son, he asked the ghost to leave him alone, and apparently, the ghost said he'd leave him alone if he opened the door. Instead of opening the door, my son came to wake us up. I was scared, but not because I thought ghosts were real, rather because something was clearly terrifying my poor son. I was thinking maybe my daughter showed him a movie or something that he wasn't supposed to see, or maybe he was just homesick, since he hadn't traveled much as a family. That night, he slept with us, and I didn't sleep very well because I could feel him shaking all night. The kid was truly scared out of his mind. At breakfast, it was the same as the day before. He barely touched his food, and he looked like he was about to collapse into his scrambled eggs. I pitched an idea to him and the rest of the family. I proposed that we have a campout in the living room. We can make a fort and we'll all sleep together. It'll be like a family sleepover or something. The kids loved it, especially my son. If he was going to see the ghosts tonight, at least I'd be there with him. We played games for a while, but eventually we all fell asleep. At 2:30 in the morning, my son was shaking me awake and said that the ghosts were outside. I got up expecting to see nothing, and I couldn't be more wrong. At the sliding door were 3 hooded figures wearing these creepy black masks with these bulging white eyes. They almost looked like golf balls. I shouted some kind of nonsense out of fear, and that woke up my wife and daughter. As soon as they saw the masked figures, they started to scream and shout. During all the commotion, I saw one figure trying to open the sliding door, but thankfully it was locked. My daughter, thinking quickly on her feet, called 911. I grabbed a big walking stick that was inside the house and approached the door. I realized that if they had real weapons, the walking stick would be useless, but I was in fight or flight mode and I had to protect my family. I started yelling at them to leave my family alone, and they looked like they were taunting me, almost like they were enjoying the mental pain they were putting my family through. The person on the left side of the door pulled out what looked like a knife and started waving it back and forth. My family was in tears and continued screaming for their lives. I'll never forget those horrible screams. And then, out of nowhere, almost like a scene from a movie, I saw the person at the end get tackled by a police officer. The other 2 sprinted away, but didn't get very far, as they were also caught by the local police force. They were arrested, and when I saw the faces under the masks, I was almost more afraid. There were 3 young men, just normal-looking guys. I found out months later that 2 of the men were 20, and one of them was 18. My son thought these 3 masked men were ghosts because it was dark and they were dressed in all black. When they were apprehended, I was informed that all 3 of them had a knife on them, not just the one guy who showed his knife. I'm convinced these random young men were targeting us specifically, considering they kept coming back. After talking extensively with local law enforcement, apparently there's a group of punks in the area that target tourists, especially tourists with families. I guess they assume that tourists with families have more money, and when they have kids, they're easier targets. The police weren't overly concerned, which made me fear that this happens all too often. It makes me sad and angry that these types of people exist in the world. You hear stories like this all over the internet, but you never think it could happen to you, especially on vacation. The police seem to think that they wouldn't have physically harmed us and they only wanted our money, but no one knows what they were capable of doing if they were able to get through that sliding door. Not to mention, the mental scars we got from this trip will last a lifetime. Sometimes the mental scars are much more painful than the physical ones. I don't actually know what became of these men, and thankfully I'll never find out, because I will never be returning to that Airbnb or that beach town for the rest of my life.